Ethan Walker grabbed her backpack and threw it to the ground. Wrong place, sweetheart. The bag hit the concrete hard. Everything inside shifted. Olivia did not flinch. She looked at the bag, looked at him. And in that silence, 3 full seconds of absolute stillness, something passed across her face that the men at that checkpoint would spend the rest of their careers trying to describe. Not anger, not fear, calculation. The kind that lives behind the eyes of someone who has already decided before the situation even started exactly how it ends. Before this day was over, the man who threw that bag would stand at attention while his commander saluted her. Subscribe now, follow every part to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning started the way all mornings at Fort Redstone started, loud, rough, and without mercy. 5:30 in the desert meant the kind of cold that bites through 3 layers of clothing and still finds your bones. The sky was that particular shade of dark purple that exists for only about 20 minutes before the sun tears it apart. And across the massive compound, engines were already growling, boots were already pounding on concrete, and men were already pushing their bodies to places most human beings would never visit in their worst nightmares. Fort Redstone was not a normal base. It was the kind of facility that appeared on no public map, that carried no official name in any press release, and that trained the specific kind of men the government needed when every other option had already failed. The operators who moved through these gates were not ordinary soldiers. They were the end of the line, the last answer. The people you called when the situation had already gone so far past impossible that a miracle was the only remaining option on the table. Sergeant Ethan Walker had been stationed at the checkpoint for 14 months. He had seen generals. He had seen senators who arrived with 6-car security details and sunglasses that cost more than his monthly paycheck. He had seen contractors who talked about classified operations with the casual confidence of men who had never once been in a real firefight. He had processed more credentials than he could count, cleared more vehicles than he could remember, and stood in that same spot through heat that bent the air and cold that cracked the skin on his hands. He thought he had seen everything. He was wrong. Corporal Ryan Mitchell was standing beside him that morning, working through his second cup of coffee and already complaining about the mission readiness drill scheduled for that afternoon. Ryan was 24 years old, built like a door, and possessed the kind of absolute confidence that belongs exclusively to young men who have not yet been humbled by the world. He was good at his job. He was also the kind of person who formed an opinion in the first 3 seconds of meeting someone and spent the next 3 hours defending that opinion regardless of evidence. Another contractor today, Ryan said, not looking up from the clipboard. Intel says we're getting some kind of precision specialist. What kind of specialist? Ethan asked. Didn't say. Just said to clear the arrival and get them through to Commander Reynolds by 0800. Ethan grunted. Precision specialists. The word meant different things to different people. Sometimes it meant a weapons expert. Sometimes it meant a communications analyst. Sometimes it meant someone who was very good at reading spreadsheets and calling it intelligence work. The gate camera flickered on the monitor. A vehicle was approaching. Rental plates. No military insignia. No escort. Ryan looked at the screen and frowned. That's our specialist? The car stopped at the outer checkpoint. The engine turned off. The door opened. And Sergeant Ethan Walker, a man who had processed thousands of arrivals without once being caught off guard, found himself completely unprepared for what stepped out of that car. She was young, early 30s maybe, dark hair pulled back, no makeup. She was wearing a simple tactical jacket that looked like it had been through a washing machine about 40 times. Not the kind of gear that contractors usually wore to make a first impression. No expensive kit, no branded patches, no visible weapons. One small backpack over her left shoulder. She moved without rushing, without looking around to take in the environment the way most new arrivals did. She walked directly toward the checkpoint. She already knew where it was. Ryan looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Ryan. And in that silent exchange, both men communicated the same thought. There's clearly been some kind of mistake. Ethan stepped forward with the practiced ease of a man who believed he was in complete control of the situation. "Morning, ma'am," he said. And even in those 2 words, there was something underneath. A kind of cheerful condescension that he probably wasn't even fully aware of. "This is a restricted installation. Can I help you find somewhere?" The woman looked at him, not glared, just looked. The way you look at something that requires a small amount of your attention before you return to more important things. I have credentials, she said. Her voice was calm, not cold, not warm, just level. The voice of someone who had learned a long time ago that emotions were tools you deployed deliberately, not reflexes you allowed to run loose. She reached into her jacket and produced an identification card and a folded set of orders. Ethan took them, started reading. His expression remained carefully neutral. This was professional behavior. He had been trained not to show surprise. He was having a difficult time with the training right now. He handed the documents to Ryan. Ryan read them, looked up at the woman, looked back down at the documents. This cycle repeated itself twice. Captain Carter, Ryan said, and there was a new quality in his voice. Caution, maybe. Or the beginning of something he didn't want to examine too closely. You're the precision specialist? That's what the orders say, Olivia said. Ryan handed the documents back. He cleared his throat. What's your specialty, Captain? Just for the log. Olivia looked at him. Precision operations. Ethan heard one of the soldiers near the barrier make a sound that was trying to be a cough and failing completely at hiding what it actually was. Ryan wrote something on the clipboard. His pen moved a little too carefully. Right. And you'll be working with the tactical team? I'll be working with whoever needs me, Olivia said. She picked up her backpack, accepted her credentials back, and waited with the quiet patience of someone who has absolutely nowhere to be in a hurry because they know with total certainty that the situation will eventually organize itself around them. Ethan waved her through. As she passed the barrier, he turned to Ryan and kept his voice low, not low enough. Precision operations, he repeated with a small smile on his face. Right, because that's going to end well. Two soldiers nearby laughed. Olivia did not break her stride, did not look back, did not react in any visible way. She simply walked through the gate of Fort Redstone and let the sound of their laughter disappear behind her, the way you let rain disappear when you're standing inside somewhere warm and dry. 3 hours later, Ethan Walker would think about that moment constantly. He would replay it in his head with the specific kind of discomfort that comes from understanding that you revealed something about yourself that you cannot take back. But that was 3 hours away. Right now, he just watched her walk across the compound and told himself he hadn't said anything that bad. Inside Fort Redstone, mornings in the Tactical Command Center had their own rhythm. The room was large, low-ceilinged, and lit with the kind of harsh fluorescent light that made everyone look like they hadn't slept in 3 days, which was accurate for most of them. Screens covered one entire wall, maps, satellite feeds, communication logs. The particular organized chaos of a facility that was always in some way actively preparing for something. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes had been standing at the far corner of the main table for 20 minutes, nursing his third coffee and pretending to review the mission parameters on his tablet when he was actually watching the room. Hayes was 51 years old. In a building full of men who looked like they had been carved from something harder than regular human material, Hayes was not the biggest or the youngest or the most dramatically impressive physical specimen. He was the kind of man who entered rooms quietly and left people with the persistent feeling hours later that they had learned something important without quite being able to identify when it happened. He had been a sniper instructor for 11 years. Before that, he had spent 2 decades in places the government preferred not to discuss in Senate hearings. He knew things, not the theoretical kind of knowing, not the things you learn from manuals kind, the kind that lives in the body, the kind that changes the way you move and the way you watch and the way you calculate every sightline in every room you enter for the rest of your life. When Hayes listened to people talk about precision shooting, he could tell within about 45 seconds whether they understood what they were actually talking about or whether they were describing something they had read. Most people fell into the second category. He was thinking about this when the briefing room door opened and Petty Officer Daniel Brooks walked in, followed by 5 other SEAL operators, followed by Commander Michael Reynolds, and followed by Hayes, looked up the woman from the gate report he'd heard about 20 minutes ago. He watched her enter the room. He watched her take a seat without asking where she should sit, without looking for someone to tell her. She found a position slightly to the side of the main table, opened a tablet, and turned her attention to the mission display on the wall. Hayes looked back at his coffee. Around him, the room was already doing what rooms full of alpha personalities always did when something unfamiliar appeared. It was producing opinions. Who is she? Daniel Brooks said it quietly, but not quietly enough. Brooks was 32, a veteran of 4 overseas deployments, and the kind of person who wore confidence the way other people wore a jacket. casually, automatically, without thinking about whether the occasion called for it. Someone behind Hayes said, "Maybe she's here to take notes." A small, suppressed laugh moved around the near side of the table. Hayes kept his eyes on his tablet. He had heard this before. He had heard it every time someone unexpected appeared in a room built for a specific kind of person. The room would push back. The room would test. The room would make its position clear through 1,000 tiny signals before a single word of direct confrontation was ever spoken. He was curious to see how she handled it. Olivia was not handling it. That was the thing. She wasn't bracing against it, wasn't responding to it, wasn't performing patience for the benefit of anyone watching. She had simply directed her full attention to the mission material on the screen with the complete disinterest of someone who genuinely could not be bothered to spend processing power on background noise. Hayes found this interesting. Commander Reynolds called the room to order, and the briefing began. The mission was designated Operation Northern Reach. The target was a man named Vasil Dragan, not his real name, Hayes knew, but the identity he had operated under for 11 years, while building one of the most sophisticated criminal networks in the Eastern Hemisphere. Dragan specialized in the movement of weapons, intelligence assets, and human beings across borders that were supposed to be uncrossable. He had survived 4 previous interdiction attempts by 3 different agencies. He had never once been in the same physical space as anyone who was trying to capture him. Now they had a location, a compound in a mountain region that Hayes had studied on satellite imagery for 6 hours and still found deeply unpleasant from a tactical standpoint. The approach routes were limited. The terrain was unforgiving. Enemy presence was distributed, professional, and motivated. The assault team could reach the compound. Hayes believed that completely. The men in this room were capable of things that would end careers if they were ever properly documented. They could go in and get out, and the target would be neutralized. And the hostages' 3 intelligence assets currently held in the lower compound would come home. But the terrain created a problem that muscle and courage could not solve. The mountain ridge to the east. The compound sat in a natural bowl. Anyone approaching from the north or west was exposed to the ridge for approximately 400 meters. 400 meters during which, if there were observers on the ridge and the satellite imagery suggested, the assault team would be seen long before they were in position. They needed overwatch. They needed someone on the high ground who could eliminate threats before those threats could eliminate the team. Reynolds was explaining this. He pointed to the ridge on the display. "We need a sniper capable of extreme distance overwatch. The compound is here. The primary threat positions are here, here, and potentially here. The overwatch position we've identified is approximately 1,900 meters from the farthest threat position." The room was quiet with the specific quality of quiet that means people are doing calculations they don't entirely like the results of. "Who's on overwatch?" someone asked. Reynolds looked at his roster. "We have your overwatch position is wrong." Every head in the room turned. Olivia was still looking at her tablet. She had not raised her hand. She had not asked permission to speak. She had simply said the words with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone pointing out that a number on a spreadsheet had been entered incorrectly. Commander Reynolds turned to look at her. His expression was the carefully controlled face of a man who had been commanding elite operators for 23 years and had learned to process surprises without broadcasting them. "Captain Carter," he said, and his voice was absolutely neutral, which Hayes recognized as a warning. "Would you like to explain that statement?" Olivia looked up from her tablet for the first time. She stood, she walked to the display wall and pointed at the ridge position that Reynolds had marked. "This position gives you an angle on the compound. But look at the elevation change on the eastern face. 32 degrees. The natural wind channel through this valley runs southeast to northwest during daylight hours. After sunset, the thermal differential between the valley floor and the ridge causes a reversal." She traced the path with her finger. "The wind shifts 90 degrees. A shooter in this position at night is firing into a crosswind they haven't calculated for because it doesn't exist in the daytime reconnaissance data. At 1,900 meters, that crosswind deflects a standard round approximately 3 meters, Hayes said. Everyone looked at him. He was looking at Olivia. She was looking back at him. 3 meters, she confirmed. Your sniper misses. And if they miss, whatever they were shooting at is now alerted and has a direction to your team's position. The room was quiet in a completely different way than it had been 30 seconds ago. Reynolds studied the display. He looked at Hayes. Hayes gave a small nod that communicated more than a paragraph of words. What position do you recommend? Reynolds asked. Olivia pointed to a different location on the ridge, farther east, higher elevation here. The wind pattern at this altitude is consistent throughout the night cycle. The angle to the compound changes, but the sight lines to the primary threat positions are actually clearer. Distance increases to 2,200 meters at the farthest point, but the shot geometry is more predictable. Daniel Brooks cleared his throat. He still had that particular expression on his face, the one that was fighting very hard between his instinct to dismiss and his inability to find a flaw in what she had just said. You're talking about 2,200-meter shots in mountain conditions at night. That's doable, Olivia said simply. If you know what you're doing. The silence this time had a texture to it. Hayes recognized that texture. It was the silence of a room recalibrating. The sound of 15 extremely capable and experienced professionals updating their assessments with new information. Reynolds looked at Olivia for a long moment. Captain Carter, he said, what exactly is your background? Olivia looked at the mission display. I solve problems from far away, she said. And for the first time since she had entered the room, nobody laughed. Hayes waited until the briefing broke for the morning planning segment, before he found a moment near the coffee station where he could stand beside her without it looking deliberate. He poured himself a cup, set the pot down. You calculated the thermal reversal from the imagery alone, he said. Not a question. The shadow patterns in the evening satellite pass, Olivia said. The terrain features make the thermal pattern predictable if you know what you're reading. Hayes nodded slowly. He looked at the display from across the room. Most people wouldn't see that. Most people don't look long enough. He turned to look at her directly. In his 11 years instructing, he had met perhaps 6 people who possessed what he privately thought of as the deep quality, the combination of technical mastery and mental stillness that separated competent shooters from something that had no adequate word in any training manual he'd ever read. He was looking at one of them now. How long have you been doing precision work? He asked. Olivia considered the question with the careful honesty of someone who doesn't waste words on approximations. Long enough that I stopped keeping track of the years and started keeping track of the lessons. Hayes almost smiled. Almost tomorrow morning, he said. The range. I want to see what you can actually do. Olivia looked at him. Why, does it change anything about the mission? No, Hayes said honestly. But there are 27 men in this building who are going to be trusting their lives to your position on that ridge, and they deserve to know who's up there. Olivia was quiet for a moment. She looked at the mission display again. Tomorrow, she said. I'll be there that night. In the barracks, the conversation was exactly what Hayes expected it to be. Brooks was in the middle of a group of 4 operators, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man performing for an audience that was already inclined to agree with him. I'm not saying she's not qualified, Brooks said, in the exact tone of voice that means the speaker is absolutely saying the person is not qualified. I'm saying nobody in this room has seen her work. We have a mission with 0 margin, and we're putting someone in an overwatch position that nobody here can personally vouch for. That's a problem. Reynolds cleared her, someone said. Reynolds cleared her paperwork, Brooks said. That's different. Hayes, sitting in the corner with his tablet and his 4th coffee of the day, said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that certain arguments needed to be answered by facts, not by words. Words in this environment were the currency of debate. Facts were the currency of trust. Tomorrow morning would produce the facts. The question was whether the facts would be sufficient. He looked at the far wall and thought about what he had seen in her eyes when she spoke about the wind reversal. Not the content was correct. He'd verified that independently, but the way she'd accessed it. With the ease of someone retrieving information they have used repeatedly, not something they were producing for the first time under pressure. You couldn't fake that. He'd seen people try. He'd been in this business long enough to know the difference between someone who was very good at appearing to know things and someone who actually, in the most fundamental way possible, knew things. Olivia Carter was the second kind. The question that was making Hayes quiet and still in his corner while Brooks continued his performance across the room was a different question entirely. Not whether she could do what the mission required. He was already certain she could. The question was why she was here. Why now? Why this mission specifically? He had read her file, the parts of her file that were available to read, which was not very much. Classified operations, redacted locations, commendations that listed no specific. A career that existed more in its absences than in its documented presence. A career like that meant she had been doing things in places that didn't appear in any official record. A career like that meant someone somewhere had decided that this specific mission needed her specifically. Hayes looked at the mission display one more time before he closed his tablet. 2,200 meters, mountain terrain, night conditions, and whatever was waiting for them in that compound that the official briefing had carefully avoided making too specific. He closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about a mission from 6 years ago. A valley in a country that wasn't on any of the official mission rosters that year. A shot from a distance that his instructors had told him was theoretically possible but practically suicidal. A shot that had saved 9 men who would otherwise have come home in boxes. A shot that no one had ever officially taken credit for. He opened his eyes. He looked across the room at the door that led to the quarters they'd assigned to Olivia Carter. He thought about the way she'd said, "I solve problems from far away." He thought about the redacted sections of her file. He thought about a call sign that had circulated in certain communities for years like a ghost story, something people mentioned in the same hushed breath as operational details that were too sensitive for open channels. Silent Raven. Hayes put his tablet away. He finished his coffee. Tomorrow morning would answer questions that 6 years of wondering hadn't been able to touch. At 4:15 in the morning, before anyone else on the base was awake, Olivia Carter was at the range. She wasn't shooting. She was sitting cross-legged on the ground behind the shooter's position, her eyes closed, completely still. When Hayes arrived at 5:30, 20 minutes before he'd told anyone to be there, because he always arrived 20 minutes before he'd told anyone to be there, she was exactly where he'd found her. He set up the range equipment without speaking. She didn't open her eyes. He set up the first target at 1,200 meters and began calibrating the wind equipment. 11 miles per hour southwest, Olivia said. Her eyes were still closed. It shifted about 4 minutes ago. Before that, it was running at 14 from the west. Hayes looked at his equipment. 11.3 miles per hour. Southwest. He looked at her. She opened her eyes. "I've been out here long enough to know what it's doing," she said simply. Hayes handed her the rifle without another word. She picked it up with the specific familiarity of someone greeting something they have worked with for a very long time. Not the eager familiarity of enthusiasm, the settled, quiet familiarity of relationship. She checked it with the efficiency of someone who knows exactly what she's looking for and finds everything where she expected it to be. She lay down. She established her position with adjustments so small they were barely visible. And then she became still. Hayes had seen a lot of people become still. He had never seen stillness quite like this. Most shooters who were trying to be still were actively working at it. You could see the effort in them, the controlled breathing, the deliberate suppression of movement. It was impressive, it was professional, but it was visible. Olivia's stillness was different. It was the stillness of something that had simply stopped moving, like a stone, like a piece of the ground that happened to be holding a rifle. The first shot hit the target. Hayes looked through the scope. Center mass. Perfect. The second shot. Nearly touching the first hole. The third shot. He put the scope down. The 3 holes were so close together that from 100 meters they would look like a single impact. 1,200 meters, morning desert wind. She hadn't adjusted between shots. She hadn't needed to. Hayes increased the distance. By the time the rest of the base was aware that something was happening at the range, there were 40 people standing behind the shooter's position. Brooks was there. Hayes had seen him arrive, noted the expression of someone who had come prepared to witness failure, and was now working very hard to process a different outcome. The target was at 1,800 meters, moving. Crosswind conditions that Hayes had specifically calibrated to be difficult without being impossible. The kind of scenario that Hayes used in his advanced instruction sessions to humble people who needed humbling. Olivia adjusted. She waited. The wait was not long. She was reading something. Hayes knew in the way the target moved and the way the wind moved, and some synthesis of those two things that was happening in her mind faster than he could track. She fired. The target fell. Behind Hayes, someone made a sound, just a small sound. The involuntary vocalization of someone whose expectations have just exceeded in a way their body registered before their brain did. Brooks was silent. Hayes walked to the target position. He stood over it. He looked at the impact point. He stood there for a long time. When he turned around and walked back, his face was doing something it very rarely did in professional settings. It was doing the thing faces do when they've encountered something genuinely unexpected. He walked to Olivia. She was already sitting up, not celebrating, not checking to see who had watched, not scanning the crowd for reactions. She was cleaning the rifle with the methodical attention of someone who cares more about the instrument than the performance. Hayes crouched down beside her. "You didn't learn that from a textbook," he said. "No," Olivia agreed. "You didn't learn it at a training facility either." She looked at him. Hayes studied her face for a long moment. He was 62% sure in climbing. 18 months ago, he said carefully. "A valley. Eastern coordinates that I'm not going to say out loud in front of 30 people. A shot that was supposed to be impossible." Olivia said nothing. That said everything. There were 9 men in that valley. Hayes said, and his voice was very quiet now, the kind of quiet that lives right at the edge of something larger. 9 men who came home because of a shot that nobody officially took, from a position that nobody officially occupied. The crowd around them had gone very still. "The call sign in the communications log," Hayes said, and he looked at her with the eyes of a man who has spent a career learning to read people and is reading something right now that is rearranging things inside him, was Silent Raven. The range was so quiet Hayes could hear the wind equipment running. Olivia looked at the rifle in her hands. She looked at it the way you look at something that has been with you through things you don't talk about, that carries the weight of those things in every scratch on its surface. "I was just doing my job," she said. Hayes stood up slowly. He had been doing this work for 30 years. He had met people of extraordinary capability. He had trained people who went on to do things that would never appear in any publicly accessible document. He had never, in 30 years, felt what he was feeling right now, which was the specific and unusual sensation of standing next to someone who was operating at a level that he himself could only approach at the very best moments of his career. He turned to the crowd. He found Brooks. Brooks was looking at Olivia with an expression that had traveled a very long distance from where it started that morning. Hayes looked back at Olivia. "You belong here," he said. 3 words, simple. Not a compliment, not an apology. A fact. More than almost anyone I've ever seen. Olivia looked at him. For the first time since she'd stepped out of that car at the checkpoint, something moved in her expression. Something very small. The faintest shadow of something that might, in a different person, have been relief. "I know," she said quietly. And for the first time all morning, it wasn't the crowd that was quiet. It was her. Because she had learned a long time ago that the most powerful things you could say were sometimes the ones you said to yourself. Hayes stepped back. Around the range, 40 soldiers who had arrived, expecting to watch a stranger, failed to meet. A standard stood in the morning desert air and looked at each other with the specific expression of people who have been given information that changes the way they understand something they thought they already understood. No one spoke. The wind moved through the range equipment. The target at 1,800 meters swayed very slightly in the distance, and the single impact point at its center was perfectly visible even from where they stood. Petty Officer Daniel Brooks looked at that target for a long time. Then he looked at Olivia. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Hayes. Hayes gave him nothing, no rescue, no interpretation, no bridge. Brooks closed his mouth again. He nodded, one single nod, and in that nod was an acknowledgement that cost him something. Hayes could see it cost him something, but he paid it anyway. That, Hayes thought, was the thing about real capability. You couldn't argue with it. You couldn't dismiss it. You could only choose whether to acknowledge it honestly or protect your ego at the expense of your integrity. Daniel Brooks in that moment chose correctly. And Olivia Carter, sitting on the ground at the 1,800-meter range, in the morning desert light of Fort Redstone, cleaning a rifle with the quiet competence of someone who had been doing exactly this in conditions far worse than these for more years than most of the people watching her had been in uniform, did not acknowledge the acknowledgement. She simply finished cleaning the rifle, set it down carefully, and looked out toward the mountains in the distance. The same mountains they would all be moving toward tomorrow. The ones where the real question was waiting to be answered, not whether she was good enough. That answer was already on the ground at 1,800 meters. The question waiting in those mountains was the same question that had been waiting in every valley and ridge and urban rooftop she had ever looked down from through a scope. Whether good enough would be enough. In her experience, it always came down to that. And in her experience, the only way to answer it was to go. So she would go, as she always had, alone above the valley, watching for the dangers the people below her couldn't yet see. being the thing standing between them and an outcome she refused to allow. That was the job. It had always been the job, and she had never once, in all the years and all the valleys and all the shots that appeared on no official record anywhere, failed to do it. She was not planning to start tomorrow. Hayes didn't sleep that night, not because he couldn't. He had slept in conditions that would have kept most people awake for weeks. He had slept in the back of moving vehicles in hostile territory, on rock floors in temperatures below zero, in positions where closing his eyes for 20 minutes meant the difference between functional and broken the next morning. Sleep was a tool he had mastered decades ago and had never lost access to. Tonight was different. Tonight he sat in the corner of the operations room with the mission file open on his tablet and a cup of coffee that had gone cold 40 minutes ago, and he kept returning to the same 3 pages, the same redacted sections, the same absence of information that, when you knew how to read it, contained more information than the pages that weren't redacted. The call sign appeared once, just once, in a communications log that someone had clearly intended to scrub but had missed during the classification review. 2 words in a routing header that were supposed to be gone. Silent Raven. Hayes put the tablet face down on the table. He picked up his cold coffee, drank it anyway. 6 years ago, he had been part of the debrief for the 9 men who came out of that valley. He had listened to their accounts. He had documented what they said and written his own assessment and filed it with a classification level that meant it would not see daylight in his lifetime. And in every account, in every testimony, there was a moment, the same moment described 9 different ways by 9 different men, where the enemy position that should have ended the mission simply stopped being a threat. No warning, no communication, no indication that anyone was watching from above. One moment the threat existed, the next moment it didn't. 9 men walked out of a valley they had no reasonable right to walk out of, and nobody ever explained how. Hayes understood now. The understanding did something to him that was difficult to name. It wasn't simple admiration. He had too much experience with capability to be easily impressed by it. It wasn't guilt exactly, though there was something in that territory. It was closer to the feeling of discovering that a debt you didn't know you had was much larger than you could have imagined. He owed her, not personally, but in the way that one professional owes another when that other person has done something that makes your survival possible. He picked up his tablet, he flipped it back over. He went back to the mission file, because tomorrow night, those 9 men were going to have company. And whatever the mountains held, Hayes intended to understand every inch of it before the first boot hit the ground. Across the base, in the room they had assigned her at the end of the East Corridor, Olivia Carter was not sleeping either. But she wasn't reviewing mission files. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and her eyes open in the dark, doing the thing she had done before every single operation of her career. The thing she had never told anyone about because it had no tactical name and no manual and no measurable outcome that she could put in a report. She was remembering, not the shots, not the missions, not the documented outcomes. She was remembering the faces of the people she had been up there for, the ones below, the ones moving through valleys and compounds and urban streets while she watched from above. She kept every face she'd ever been responsible for in a specific place in her memory, organized not by mission or date, but by the particular quality of the moment when she understood that they were in danger. That specific instant of recognition, through the scope, when the threat materialized and the calculation began, and the world reduced itself to distance and wind and the steadiness of her own heartbeat. She did this before every mission. She did it so she would not forget when she was up there on that ridge in the dark and the cold with the weight of the rifle against her shoulder, exactly what the distance meant, exactly what was moving through that valley below, exactly what she was responsible for. It was not a ritual anyone had taught her. It was something she had discovered on her own, after a mission early in her career, when she had taken a shot that needed to be taken and returned to base and sat alone in a room and felt nothing and been frightened by that nothing in a way she had never forgotten. She had decided that night that the nothing was more dangerous than the fear, that the nothing meant something was closing down inside her that needed to stay open. And so she built this remembering, this deliberate act of keeping the weight real. She sat with it until the weight settled into something she could carry. Then she closed her eyes. And finally, 3 hours before dawn, she slept. The base woke at 5. By 5:15, the conversation in the mess hall was already running at full speed, and Hayes, arriving early as always, caught the shape of it from the doorway before he walked in. Brooks was at the center table. 3 operators around him. The volume was controlled, but the energy was not. "I'm not disputing what I saw at the range," Brooks said. He had his hands flat on the table, which was a thing Hayes had noticed he did when he was working through something he genuinely wasn't sure about. A different gesture from his usual performance. More internal. "I'm saying that's target shooting. That's controlled conditions. Known distance, measured wind. We don't have any of that on this mission, and we're putting her in the most critical position in the entire operation." She called the thermal reversal, said a younger operator named Castillo, who was sitting across from Brooks and had the look of someone who had arrived at the conversation mid-argument. She calculated that from satellite imagery alone. Reynolds confirmed it with the meteorological data. Reynolds confirmed the physics, Brooks said. He didn't confirm that she can execute at that distance in those conditions under actual combat stress. "You want to test her under combat stress?" Castillo said. "I want someone I know." Brooks said, and there it was, the real sentence finally. The one underneath all the tactical language. "I want someone whose work I've seen. I want someone whose record I can read. Her file has more holes in it than information." Hayes walked to the coffee station. He poured a cup. He said without turning around, "The holes in her file are the information, Brooks." The table went quiet. Hayes turned. He looked at Brooks with the steady attention of a man who has decided to be direct. "Classified operations don't disappear from a file because nothing happened," Hayes said. "They disappear because what happened cannot be documented. Because the documentation itself would be a security risk. Because the mission was in a location we officially were never in, against a target we officially never engaged, using methods that officially don't exist." He paused. "You want to know her record?" "I know her record. I know 9 specific data points. They're walking around right now at various bases in this country because she was in a position nobody else was willing to take." Brooks looked at him. "Operation Black Valley," Hayes said quietly. Something changed in Brooks's face. Every operator at the table knew that name. It was the kind of name that moved through certain communities in certain ways. Not openly, not in briefings or official channels. In the spaces between official things. In the conversations that happened in exactly the kind of setting they were in right now. "That was her?" Castillo said. Hayes picked up his coffee. "That was her." The table was quiet long enough that it stopped being a pause and started being an adjustment. The kind that happens when a framework cracks and the people inside it have to rebuild from new information. Brooks looked down at his hands on the table. He looked at them for several seconds. Hayes watched him and said nothing more because nothing more needed to be said. "Okay," Brooks said finally. The word came out stripped of everything that usually accompanied his words. No performance, no audience management. Just one syllable that was trying to be honest. "Okay," Hayes nodded once. He took his coffee to the corner table, where he always sat. He thought about the mountain ridge. He thought about 1,900 meters, 2,200 at the farthest point. He thought about the wind reversal that Olivia had identified from imagery that 4 other analysts had reviewed without seeing. And he thought that whatever Brooks was feeling this morning in the mess hall, uncomfortable and recalibrating and working through the gap between what he'd assumed and what was true, that discomfort was actually the most useful thing that could have happened. Because the men going into that valley tonight needed to trust the person watching from above with the specific, total, non-negotiable trust that comes not from liking someone or from comfort, but from understanding. They understood now, or they were beginning to. The rest would come when it needed to come. At 0800, Commander Reynolds called the final mission briefing. The room had a different quality than it had 24 hours earlier. Hayes noticed it immediately upon entering. The chairs around the main table were occupied with the same people, wearing the same expressions of professional readiness, but something underneath those expressions had shifted. The morning range session had done something that no briefing could have done. It had replaced the theoretical with the actual, and the actual was that the woman now standing at the far end of the table, looking at the updated satellite imagery, with the focused attention of someone who had been doing this kind of analysis her entire career, had put 3 rounds through the same hole at 1,200 meters, before most of them had finished their first coffee. The room, Hayes thought, was paying a different kind of attention now. Reynolds ran through the operational timeline. Infiltration at 2,200 hours. The assault team would move in 2 elements. Primary breach through the north approach. Secondary containment on the east perimeter. Hostage location was confirmed in the lower compound south building. Enemy presence was assessed at 20 to 25 armed personnel, with the possibility of additional external security that hadn't been captured in the imagery. Overwatch deploys at 2000, Reynolds said. He looked directly at Olivia, 2 hours before the team moves. You'll need that time to establish position and run your wind readings. Olivia nodded. Communication protocol, Reynolds continued. You are eyes up. You call what you see, the team responds. You do not take a shot without confirmation from me unless it is an immediate threat to team personnel. Is that understood? Understood, Olivia said. If communications go dark for any reason, I use my judgment, Olivia said. Reynolds studied her for a moment. That's correct. Brooks, sitting 2 seats down from Reynolds, leaned forward slightly. What's your extraction protocol if your position is compromised? Olivia looked at him. The question was a professional question. Hayes recognized it as such. The edge that had been in Brooks's voice yesterday was not in it now. It was a genuine operational question, the kind that an experienced operator asks because he genuinely wants to know the answer. I move east along the ridge to the secondary position, Olivia said. 1,200 meters. I maintain overwatch from there until the team is clear. If the secondary is compromised, I go dark and move to the extraction point independently. Independently, Brooks said, yes. That's a 4-kilometer movement through mountain terrain in the dark. I know, Olivia said. I've walked the route on the imagery. Brooks held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. The same stripped-down honesty of the mess hall translated into a single gesture. Reynolds moved through the rest of the operational details. Communications frequencies, medical protocols, contingency plans for 3 different scenarios involving enemy reinforcement. Olivia listened to everything. She asked 2 questions. Both were precise. Both revealed that she had been thinking several steps ahead of where the briefing currently was. And both produced a brief silence while Reynolds worked through the implications before answering. When the briefing ended and the room began to disperse, something happened that Hayes observed from his position near the door and that he thought about for a long time afterward. Castillo, walking past Olivia on his way out, stopped. He extended his hand. Castillo, he said. I was at the range this morning. Olivia shook his hand. I know who you are, Castillo said. There was no performance in it, no audience. He said it the way you say something true. I just wanted to say that before tonight. Olivia looked at him with the steady attention she gave everything. Appreciated, she said. Castillo nodded and walked out. Hayes watched this and thought, that's how it starts. Not with speeches, not with dramatic turnarounds. With one person deciding to be honest and then another, and then the room is different and you can't entirely identify when it changed. He was almost at the door when Reynolds caught his arm. Hayes. Hayes stopped. Reynolds looked at him with the specific expression he wore when he was about to say something he had been carrying for a while. You knew before the range. You knew what she was. I suspected, Hayes said. How? Hayes thought about it honestly. The way she looked at the map, he said finally. Most people look at a map and see what's on it. She looked at it and saw what it meant, what it would become at night, in wind under pressure. She was reading something that isn't written down. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. She's better than anyone I've ever brought into an operation. Yes, Hayes said simply. That should make me feel better about tonight, Reynolds said. Doesn't it? Reynolds looked at the mission display on the wall, the mountain ridge, the compound in the valley bowl, the distances that the mission requires someone to cross, with nothing but precision and patience and the ability to be alone in the dark for hours with the full weight of other people's lives pressed against the inside of her chest. It makes me feel responsible, Reynolds said, for putting her up there. Hayes looked at the display. She's been up there her whole career, Commander, he said quietly. The only difference tonight is that we know her name. Reynolds had nothing to say to that. Hayes walked out. The afternoon moved with the particular speed of hours that are full of preparation and therefore feel both long and short at the same time. Equipment checks, communication tests. A final review of the imagery from the overnight satellite pass that had produced 3 new data points about enemy patrol patterns that Olivia incorporated into her position planning with the efficiency of someone running. A calculation they had already been preparing for. At 1400 hours, Hayes found her at the range again. She wasn't shooting. She was dry firing the practice of running through the shooting sequence without live ammunition, building the muscle memory of the motion until it required no conscious direction at all. Hayes had done this himself thousands of times. It was the kind of work that looked like nothing from the outside, and meant everything from the inside. He sat down nearby and watched for a while without speaking. After several minutes, Olivia lowered the rifle. "You can ask," she said without looking at him. "Ask what?" "Whatever you've been working up to since last night." Hayes considered this. He respected directness too much to deflect it. "Black Valley," he said. "I was on the debrief team. I wrote the assessment." Olivia was quiet. "The 9 men described the shot," Hayes said. "They described it in terms that made it clear they understood exactly what it meant. That someone had been in that position for at least 6 hours before the mission began. In winter conditions. Alone." "That's correct," Olivia said. "The position you were in," Hayes said carefully, "was not in any operational plan. Nobody assigned that position. Nobody authorized it." "No," Olivia said. "You chose it yourself." "Yes. Because you'd identified that the assigned Overwatch position had the same problem that the position here had in yesterday's briefing." Hayes said, "The wind reversal." Olivia looked at him for the first time. Her expression was not the expression of someone being caught or exposed. It was the expression of someone who is listening carefully to determine whether the person across from them actually understands. "Nobody else saw it," she said. "No. I flagged it through proper channels," she said, 3 days before the mission. "The assessment came back that my calculation was within acceptable variance." Hayes felt something move through him. He had read that assessment. He had not written it, but he had read it. He remembered the dismissal. The phrase "within acceptable variance" applied to a wind calculation in mountain terrain that Olivia had been exactly correct about. "Your shot saved 9 lives," he said. "My calculation saved 9 lives," Olivia said. "The shot just executed the calculation. This was not false modesty." Hayes understood that. It was a precise, technical statement about what had actually happened. The calculation, the hours of observation and mathematics and environmental reading that produced the exact understanding of what that shot required was the work. The trigger pull was the final step of work that was 99% complete before she ever settled behind the rifle. "Why didn't you come forward?" Hayes said afterward. Olivia picked up the rifle again. She ran the dry fire sequence. "Perfect. Every time. Perfect. Because I didn't do it for credit," she said. "I did it because 9 men needed to come home." Hayes sat with that for a long time. The afternoon sun moved. The shadows on the range stretched. At 1700, a vehicle approached the range. Brooks stepped out. Hayes watched him walk toward them and then stop about 10 feet away, in the particular posture of someone who has come with a purpose but is uncertain about the timing. Olivia saw him. She lowered the rifle. Brooks cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology," he said. "No preamble, no softening. Directly. Yesterday morning. The things I said in the briefing room. And before that, the comments in the barracks. You weren't supposed to hear those, but I heard them," Olivia said. Brooks absorbed this without flinching. "I know. I'm sorry. My assessment was based on nothing except what I assumed, and what I assumed was wrong. I'd like to go into tonight without that between us." Olivia looked at him for a moment with the steady attention that Hayes had already come to recognize as her form of active listening. She was not just hearing the words. She was reading everything around them. "I understand why you questioned it," she said finally. "That doesn't make it right," Brooks said. "No," she agreed, "but it makes it human." Something in Brooks's posture released, not dramatically, just the small, almost invisible relaxation of a tension that had been held for too long. "I'll be on your eastern flank tonight," he said. "Primary breach team. If your position gets compromised," "I know the protocol," she said. "I know you know the protocol." He paused. "I'm saying I'll be watching." Olivia considered this. She said, the same words she'd given Castillo, but it meant something different now, delivered to someone who had come farther to say something harder. Brooks nodded. He turned to walk back to his vehicle and then stopped. Without turning around, he said, "Black Valley. You were up there 6 hours before we knew we needed you." Olivia said nothing. "How did you know?" Brooks said. A pause. "I read the terrain," she said, "and I thought about what I would do if I wanted to stop the mission. Then I went to that position first." Brooks stood still for a moment. Then he got in his vehicle and drove back toward the main compound. Hayes looked at Olivia. "He'll follow you into that valley if he has to," Hayes said. "I know," Olivia said. "Is that useful to you?" She thought about it seriously. "It's useful to the mission," she said. "Which is the same thing." Hayes almost smiled. At 1900, the team assembled for final equipment checks in the vehicle bay. The energy in the room was the specific compressed energy of professionals who have done everything they can do in preparation and are now in the space before the thing itself. Not nervousness, exactly. Controlled intensity. The mind running its final checks. Hayes moved through the room. He checked equipment because that was what you did, but he was also reading the room, feeling its temperature, noticing the things you could only notice when you had been doing this long enough to understand what a team looked like when it was right and what it looked like when something was wrong. This team was right. There were still edges. There were still the last remnants of uncertainty that followed a disruption to what people thought they knew. But underneath the edges was something solid. The range that morning had built something. The briefing had reinforced it. The conversations through the afternoon had done the rest. They trusted her. Not completely yet. Complete trust was built in the field, in the moments when everything went wrong and one person's decision was the reason everyone else survived. But they were moving in the direction of trust, which was the only direction that mattered. Olivia was at the far end of the vehicle bay, running her final equipment check with Sergeant Major Torres, the team's primary logistics chief. Hayes watched her work through the checklist with the focused efficiency of someone who treats preparation as the most serious part of the mission, because she knew from experience that every mistake made in a vehicle bay at 1900 was a crisis waiting to materialize at 2200 in the dark on a mountain ridge. She checked the rifle 3 times, not because she doubted her earlier checks, but because 3 was the number she had decided on long ago, and she never deviated from it. She checked her communication equipment, tested the frequency, listened to Reynolds' voice confirm reception, adjusted. She checked her cold weather gear because the temperature at that altitude after midnight would drop to conditions that compromised fine motor function, and she needed her hands to work at 2200 meters the same way they worked in the bay right now. Torres watched her and said nothing, which was his form of approval. At 1940, Reynolds gathered the team. He looked around the room. He was a man who understood that words before a mission served a function, but that the function was not inspiration, it was calibration. Getting everyone in the room on exactly the same frequency. Making sure that what each person understood about the mission was precisely what Reynolds needed them to understand. "We're going clean," he said. "We move fast, we communicate constantly, and we bring 3 people home who have been waiting too long for this." He paused. "Our overwatch tonight is Captain Carter. Her position on the ridge is the reason we can move the way we're going to move. Her eyes are the reason we don't get hit from directions we can't see." He looked at Olivia. "She is the mission's spine, understand that." The room was quiet. Brooks looked at Olivia from across the space. She was looking at the floor, processing the last of her mental preparation, doing the thing Hayes had seen her do in the dark, bringing the weight of what she was responsible for fully into her body and making peace with carrying it. She looked up. She found Brooks's eyes across the room. He gave her the smallest nod. She returned it. Reynolds said, "Mount up." The vehicles moved out at 2000 hours exactly. Hayes stood at the vehicle bay entrance and watched them go. He was not on this mission. His role was support and debrief. He would be in the operations room for the duration, tracking communication and monitoring the mission feed. He watched the vehicles until the lights disappeared past the outer perimeter. He thought about 9 men in a valley 6 years ago. He thought about a shot from a position nobody assigned, in conditions nobody believed were survivable, that everyone had tried to explain away for 6 years as something other than what it was. He thought about the woman now moving toward a mountain ridge in the dark with a rifle and a calculation and the specific unshakable kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside because it makes no noise and requires no audience. He turned and walked back into the operations room. He sat down at his station, he put on his headset, and he waited for the moment when the mountain would reveal what it held. In the dark vehicle moving toward the drop point, Olivia Carter sat against the door with her eyes closed and her rifle across her knees and her mind running through the position one more time. Not reviewing the mathematics, those were finished and filed and ready. Running through the feeling of the position, the weight of the altitude, the shape of the wind, the distances as they would exist not on a screen but in the real dark of the real mountain, where every number she had calculated in a warm room would need to translate perfectly into action at the exact moment it was required. She thought about the men in the vehicle around her. She thought about the 3 people in the compound below. She thought about what the ridge would look like from above and what the valley would look like from the ridge, and how those 2 things had to connect in the dark in real time, with no opportunity for revision. She thought about the shot, not the technique, not the mathematics, the commitment. The moment when everything else falls away and there is only the breath and the heartbeat and the distance and the decision. She had made that decision before she got in the vehicle. She had made it truthfully, the moment Reynolds had looked at her in that briefing room and said she was the mission's spine. She was ready. The vehicle moved through the dark toward the mountains, and the mountains waited, the way they always had, carrying everything they held in silence until the moment arrived to give it up. The drop point was 4 kilometers from the base of the ridge. Olivia was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. No ceremony, no final words. She pulled her pack, checked her rifle one last time by feel alone, the way you check something in the dark when your hands know it better than your eyes ever could, and she moved. 200 hours. 2 hours before the assault team needed to be in position. 2 hours to climb 400 meters of mountain terrain in the dark, establish a firing position, run wind readings at altitude, and be completely settled and invisible before the valley below came alive with the sounds of men moving toward a compound that did not want to be found. Brooks watched her go from the vehicle window. He watched until the dark swallowed her completely, which took about 40 seconds. She moves fast for someone carrying that much weight, Castillo said beside him. Brooks said nothing. He was thinking about what she'd told him at the range, that she'd been in Black Valley 6 hours before anyone knew she was needed. 6 hours in winter mountain conditions alone, in a position that wasn't on any operational plan, because she had read the terrain and understood what the terrain would do before anyone else thought to ask the question. Tonight she had 2 hours. He hoped 2 hours was enough. He turned to the team. Primary element moves in 90 minutes. Let's check our gear and get our heads right. The vehicles dispersed into the dark. The mountain waited. Olivia had climbed in worse conditions. She cataloged this fact without comfort or pride, simply as information. The terrain was difficult but predictable. She had studied the imagery long enough that the major features were mapped inside her before she touched them with her boots. The loose section at the 200-meter mark, the shelf at 260 that looked stable on imagery but would shift under full weight. The final approach to the ridge, 40 meters of near vertical, that required both hands and the specific kind of trust in your own body that you either built over years or never had at all. She moved at a pace that was fast enough to make the timeline and controlled enough to arrive with steady hands. At the 200-meter mark, the loose section was exactly where she'd calculated it would be. She crossed it in 9 steps with her weight distributed precisely the way the surface required. At 260, the shelf shifted under her left boot, exactly as she'd anticipated. She was already compensating before it moved. She climbed. Her breathing stayed controlled. Her heart rate stayed in the range she needed. This was not willpower, it was years of building the physiological responses that a body needs to perform at altitude under load. The same patient construction that built everything else she was. At 21:40, she reached the ridge. She was 11 minutes ahead of schedule. She did not allow herself any reaction to this. She found her position, the one she'd identified in the imagery, the one that gave her the sight lines she needed to the 3 primary threat positions in the valley below, and she established herself with the methodical efficiency of someone building something that needs to last. Pack down, rifle out, position confirmed. She lay down and became still. And then she began to read the wind. This was the part that had no manual. You could calculate wind from instruments, and you could trust instruments up to a point. But at altitude after dark, with the thermal reversal she'd predicted, the instruments told you what the air was doing at the instrument. The air between the instrument and the target was a living thing that moved differently at different heights and over different terrain features. And at 2,200 meters, that difference was the margin between a perfect shot and a miss that cost someone their life. So she read it. She had been doing this long enough that reading wind had become something she could not entirely explain. It was a synthesis of what she saw and what she felt and what she knew, running simultaneously, producing a number that was more reliable than any instrument she'd ever used because it incorporated variables that instruments couldn't measure. She read it for 20 minutes. The reversal she'd predicted was happening exactly as she'd calculated, beginning at 21:55 and moving through its full rotation by 22:10. After that, the wind at the ridge settled into a consistent northwest pattern that ran at 11 miles per hour with a 4-mile variance on a predictable cycle. She had the wind. In the operations room at Fort Redstone, Hayes was watching 3 screens simultaneously. The mission feed showed the primary element moving toward the north approach, right on schedule. Reynolds' voice on the communication channel was steady and precise, calling positions and checking in with each element with the regularity of a heartbeat. The overhead imagery feed showed the compound below, the movement of the two visible enemy patrols running their standard pattern, and in the upper right corner of the frame, a heat signature on the ridge that was Olivia's position. Hayes looked at that heat signature, small still, settled into the rock like it had always been there. He looked at the compound. He looked at the distance between them. 2,200 meters to the farthest threat position. He had been in this business long enough to know what 2,200 meters meant in mountain conditions at night. He knew it in his body, the way he knew everything, real not as a number, but as a physical understanding of what the shot required and what it cost and what happened if the calculation was even slightly wrong. He looked at the heat signature on the ridge. He thought, she already has the wind. He could tell from the stillness, the specific quality of motionlessness that meant the work was done and now there was only waiting. He had seen that quality once before in a shooter in his own career, 20 years ago, in a man who was now considered among the finest long-distance operators in the country's history. He had never expected to see it again. He was watching it right now. Hayes Torres's voice from across the room. Primary element is at the base of the north approach. Secondary element is in position on the east perimeter. Copy, Hayes said. He kept his eyes on the screen. How's weather? Stable. Wind at the ridge is running northwest, consistent around 11. Hayes almost smiled. Torres looked at him. You knew. She knew, Hayes said. I just believed her. On the ridge, Olivia heard Reynolds' voice in her earpiece. Overwatch primary element is moving. Check in. Overwatch is set, she said. Her voice was the same as it was in every conversation she'd had over the past 24 hours. Level, controlled. Not performing calm, actually calm. The way you are when your body has completed its preparation and your mind has made its decision and there is nothing left to do but execute. Copy, Reynolds said. Primary element is moving in 60 seconds. Understood. I have eyes on the valley. 2 visible patrols running standard pattern. No deviation. Any threats to the approach route? Olivia scanned. East side of the compound, the rocks above the north approach. She had been watching that position for 18 minutes and had seen nothing. But the imagery had suggested the possibility of a third patrol that hadn't appeared yet. Approach route is clear, she said. I'm watching a possible position on the east rocks above your entry point. Nothing confirmed yet. How possible? Reynolds asked. 60%, she said. Keep moving. I'll tell you if that changes. Copy, Reynolds said. 60 seconds passed. The primary element moved. Olivia watched them from above, the heat signatures on her monitoring equipment moving in the clean, disciplined formation of people who had done this enough times that their movements carried the memory of every previous mission. Reynolds at point, Brooks on his left flank, Castillo and 3 others in a staggered line behind. She watched them and she watched the compound and she watched the east rocks above the entry point. All 3 simultaneously, the way she had trained herself to hold multiple frames of attention without losing clarity in any of them. 2 minutes into the movement, the patrol on the south side of the compound changed its pattern. It was small, almost nothing. The patrol had been running a 40-meter loop on the south perimeter for the 40 minutes Olivia had been watching it. It ran the loop, reached the southeast corner, turned, came back. Now it didn't turn, it kept moving east. Olivia's breathing did not change. Her heartbeat did not change. But her attention sharpened to a point that had no name in any training manual. Reynolds, she said, her voice carrying exactly the controlled urgency that communicated priority without creating panic. South Patrol has changed pattern. Moving east, it will reach line of sight to your position in approximately 3 minutes. Reynolds' voice came back immediately. Options? You can hold for 4 minutes and the patrol completes the deviation and returns to pattern. Or you move to the rocks on your right. Hold there until I give you clear. A pause, 3 seconds. Reynolds was calculating. Can you handle the patrol if it reaches line of sight? Olivia already knew the answer. She had calculated it the moment the patrol changed its movement. The distance was 1,960 meters. Wind was in her profile. The shot was clean. But taking it changed everything. It announced presence. It triggered response. It compressed the entire timeline of the operation to the next 4 minutes instead of the planned 12. I can handle it, she said. But taking it changes the mission. Reynolds said. Team, move to the rocks. Hold. The heat signatures on Olivia's monitor shifted right. Clean, fast, no hesitation. The patrol continued east. Olivia tracked it. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The patrol reached a point that should have been line of sight to the primary element's original position. It stopped. Olivia's finger moved to the trigger guard. Not inside, on the outside. The position that means, I am ready, but I am not yet committed. The patrol stopped for 11 seconds. Then it turned and began moving back toward the south perimeter. Olivia watched it complete the return movement. She watched it settle back into its standard loop. Reynolds, she said. Patrol has returned to standard pattern. Approach route is clear. Copy, Reynolds said. His voice was absolutely steady. Primary element is moving. Hayes heard the exchange from the operations room and felt something release in his chest that he hadn't been aware he was holding. Torres looked at him from across the room. She held, Torres said. She was always going to hold, Hayes said. She doesn't take shots that change the mission unless the alternative is worse. Torres turned back to his screens. Hayes watched the heat signatures resume their movement toward the compound. He thought, this is the work, not the dramatic shot, not the moment that everyone sees and remembers, the hold, the decision not to act, the patience to wait for the right moment instead of the available moment. This was what separated the extraordinary from the merely excellent. He had tried to teach it for 11 years. He had never been sure how much of it was teachable. He watched the signatures move and thought that some things were simply built into a person by the particular combination of experienced character that no program could manufacture. The primary element reached the base of the compound wall at 22:31. They were 19 seconds ahead of schedule. On the ridge, Olivia heard Reynolds' low voice, in position. Waiting on secondary confirmation, she scanned the east perimeter. The secondary element was already there. She could see them on her monitor, pressed against the wall exactly where they were supposed to be. Secondary is in position, she confirmed. East perimeter is clear. One guard station at the northeast corner. Guard is stationary. Has been stationary for the last 4 minutes. Copy, Reynolds said. We wait for the guard rotation. Standard security rotation ran on a 20-minute cycle. They had been tracking it for 2 days. The guard at the northeast corner would be relieved in approximately 3 minutes, and in the 45-second window between the outgoing guard departing and the incoming guard arriving, the secondary element had a clear approach to the east perimeter door. Olivia watched the guard, watched the compound, watched the south patrol, which had returned fully to its standard pattern, watched the east rocks above the north approach, where the possible third patrol had never materialized. And then in the space between one breath and the next, she saw something that wasn't on any satellite imagery, wasn't in any intelligence assessment, and had no business being where it was. A figure on the west roof. She almost missed it, almost. But in the particular quality of stillness that she had cultivated over years of exactly this kind of watching, the movement registered. A single figure, not moving now. Having moved, someone who had been in one position and was now in a different position, and the difference between those two positions had lasted less than 2 seconds before the figure became still again. Someone trying very hard not to be seen. Olivia stared at the position for 4 seconds, running the calculation. The west roof had not appeared in any of the threat assessments. It was too exposed, too elevated, too obvious as a position to be an intentional security posting, which meant it was either an accidental presence, someone who had wandered somewhere they shouldn't, or it was a deliberate placement designed to exploit the assumption that nobody would use an obvious position. Either way, Reynolds. Her voice was quiet but sharp. West roof. Single observer, they may have eyes on your current position. Reynolds' response came instantly. Confirmed or possible. I have movement now stationary. Position is inconsistent with standard security posture. I assess it as a threat. 1 second. Can you take it without triggering the compound? Olivia had already run this calculation. The west roof was shielded from the south patrol's line of movement. The northeast guard was facing the wrong direction. If the shot was clean, if the figure went down without sound, without movement, without anything that looked from the compound's interior, like anything other than stillness, the mission timeline held. If she missed or if the shot created visible reaction, the compound went to alert in under 30 seconds. 2,240 meters to the west roof from her current position. Wind at 11 from the northwest. The figure was stationary. I can take it, she said, a beat. Take it, Reynolds said. Olivia breathed in, breathed out. The world reduced. Not disappeared, reduced. Everything that existed in her awareness compressed into the specific set of inputs that mattered: distance, wind, the almost imperceptible rise and fall of the target's breathing that told her the person on that roof was alive and present and unaware. She waited for the cycle, wind, breath, heartbeat. The three rhythms coming into the same space, the same alignment, the fraction of a second, when everything was as still as it would ever be. She fired. The figure on the west roof went down without a sound. No reaction from the compound, no movement from the south patrol. The northeast guard remained stationary, facing away. The mission timeline held. Olivia worked the bolt. Maintained position, watched. 3 seconds. 5. Nothing changed. West roof is clear, she said. Your timeline is intact. In the operations room, Hayes heard this and felt the specific quality of professional reverence that he had not felt in years. Torres was looking at his screen with his mouth slightly open, which Hayes had never seen before. Torres started. Yes, Hayes said. Torres closed his mouth. Hayes looked at the heat signature on the ridge. Still, exactly as still as it had been before the shot, as if nothing had changed. As if what had just happened, the identification of a threat that no intelligence assessment had captured, the calculation performed in real time under mission pressure, the execution at 2,200 meters in the dark on a mountain ridge was simply the next item in a sequence that had been running without interruption since the moment she left the vehicle. Which, Hayes understood, was exactly what it was. The northeast guard rotation happened at 22:38. The outgoing guard moved south. The 45-second window opened. Go, Reynolds said. The secondary element moved through the east perimeter door. Clean silent, they were inside in 7 seconds. Reynolds' primary element began their breach of the north approach. Olivia watched it all from above. The convergence of two elements moving toward a single objective, the compound below beginning to change as the presence inside it shifted from the ordinary tension of a criminal enterprise going about its business to something else, the first faint signals of awareness that something was different. Something was wrong, though nothing had yet confirmed it. She watched a guard near the south building begin to move in a way that was slightly off his standard pattern. Not enough to confirm awareness, enough to flag. Reynolds' south building guard is deviating. Minor, watch your exit route. Copy, Reynolds said. His breathing was even, moving, fast. Time to objective? 90 seconds at current pace, Olivia said. Secondary? A different voice. Castillo leading the secondary element inside the compound. We're at the lower corridor. 60 seconds to hostage location. Olivia tracked both elements. Her attention divided cleanly between them without losing precision in either direction, a skill that could not be taught in any classroom, and existed in her as naturally as breathing, the product of years of exactly this situation. Then the radio crackled. Static. Then Reynolds' voice. And this time the control was still there, but underneath it was something that wasn't there before. Something that communicated urgency in the specific frequency of a professional who is encountering unexpected resistance. Overwatch, we have contact, north corridor. 2 armed moving toward primary element. Olivia found them in her monitor immediately. 2 heat signatures. Moving fast, north corridor, cutting toward Reynolds' approach path. They would intersect in approximately 40 seconds. The angle from her position to the north corridor was 17 degrees off her current sight line. She moved 3 inches of adjustment, deliberate, precise, the kind of movement that looks like nothing and changes everything. I have them, she said. Can you get both? Reynolds said. The 2 signatures were moving in single file. The corridor was narrow. The geometry meant she had a clear line to the first and a partially obstructed line to the second until they cleared the corridor's turn, which they would do in approximately 15 seconds. Give me 15 seconds, she said. You have 12, Reynolds said. Olivia adjusted 1 more degree. The first signature cleared the corridor turn. She fired. The first target went down. The second signature reacted, stopped, started to turn. The instinctive response of someone who has just lost the person in front of them, and in that half second of reaction, she fired again. The second target went down. Clear, she said. Reynolds' voice came back immediately. Copy moving. Hayes in the operations room was standing. He had not realized he'd stood. He looked down at his chair and then back at the screen and chose to remain standing because sitting felt like the wrong response to what he was watching. Torres was on his feet too. Both at that range, Torres said. Through a corridor from 2,200 meters. 2,260, Hayes said. He had calculated it when she'd moved to the new position. Torres shook his head slowly. Hayes watched the screen. The mission was not over. At 22:51, Castillo's voice, we have the packages. 3 confirmed. They're mobile, we're moving. 3 hostages. Moving. The primary objective was achieved, but between Castillo's element and the extraction point was 200 meters of compound interior that was now with the noise of Reynolds' contact, moving toward alert status. Olivia heard the compound's internal communications shift, not the words, but the rhythm of them. The change in frequency of radio traffic inside the compound that told her, without needing to hear the content, that someone inside had heard something and was asking questions. Alert status was coming. She had perhaps 90 seconds before it arrived fully. Reynolds, she said, the compound is moving to alert. You have 90 seconds before they have a coordinated response. I'd estimate 60. Copy, no hesitation. Castillo pushed the pace. Pushing, Castillo said. His breathing was audible now. Moving fast with 3 people who had been in captivity long enough that fast movement was not their current capability. How mobile are the packages? Reynolds said. Mobile enough, Castillo said. Moving, Olivia scanned ahead of Castillo's element. The route to the extraction point ran through the south building's exterior and then 40 meters across open ground to the east perimeter wall. In the south building, 2 guards. Castillo, she said. South building exterior. 2 guards. 22 meters from your exit point. Can you clear them? Castillo said. Olivia moved her position again. Another adjustment. The south building exterior was 2,100 meters from her current sight line at a sharp angle. The guards were moving in a pattern that would bring them into her line in approximately 10 seconds. She waited 8 seconds, 9. The first guard stepped into her line. She fired. Before the sound had fully processed, she was already moving to the second guard's position. The second guard had heard something, not the shot. She was too far for the sound to be immediate, but the fall of the first. The instinctive scan and respond that every trained security person runs automatically. The guard turned, looked directly from that distance, and in that dark, at nothing. But turning was the mistake. Turning gave Olivia the angle she needed. She fired. South building exterior is clear, she said. Castillo, you have an open route to the east wall. Move now. Castillo moved. In the operations room, Hayes watched the heat signatures converge. Castillo's element, the 3 hostages slower, unsteady, but moving in Reynolds' primary element, cutting across from the north to provide cover. 60 seconds, Torres said, watching the alert status spreading through the compound on the communication monitors. They'll be clear in 50, Hayes said. He said it with the certainty of someone who has watched the whole mission and understands exactly what the margin is and exactly what the woman on the ridge is doing to protect it. He was right. Castillo's element reached the east wall at 2303. Reynolds' element came in from the north at 2304. Overwatch, Reynolds said. We're at the wall. Any threats on the extraction route? Olivia scanned. The extraction route ran east from the wall for 800 meters to the vehicle position. Open ground, no cover. 800 meters in which anything that pursued from the compound had a clear line. She scanned behind them. The compound was coming fully alive now. She could see heat signatures moving toward the east perimeter at speed. You have pursuit, she said. 3 signatures moving fast. You need to move now. Moving, Reynolds said. The signatures behind the team were closing. Olivia tracked them. The geometry was changing. Fast pursuit moving east. Team moving east. The distance between them compressing at a rate that gave her approximately 90 seconds before the pursuit element had a functional line on the team. Reynolds, she said. Pursuit will have a line on you in 90 seconds. I can take the lead element now. Distance? Reynolds said. From me or from you? Both. From me, 2,300 meters. From you, 60 meters, and closing a beat. Take the lead element, Reynolds said. Olivia tracked the lead pursuit signature. It was moving fast, committed, unaware that it was already inside a calculation that had been running for the past 40 seconds. She fired. The lead element went down. The second and third signatures stopped, paused. The pause was human, the involuntary hesitation of people who have just lost someone in front of them without understanding why. The pause gave the team 40 additional seconds. 40 seconds in which the team covered 130 meters. Overwatch, Reynolds said. Status, pursuit has stopped moving, Olivia said. You are clear to the extraction point. The team reached the vehicles at 2312. Hayes heard Reynolds' voice on the channel, and for the first time in the entire operation, the control in it carried something additional. Something that was not quite emotion and not quite relief, but lived in the territory between them. All elements are at extraction. 3 packages confirmed. 0 friendly casualties. We are moving to departure. Torres looked at Hayes. Hayes was looking at the ridge position on the screen. The heat signature still. Exactly as still as it had been 2 hours ago when she'd settled in and begun her wind readings. She had not moved from her position for 3 hours and 22 minutes. She had taken 11 shots in conditions that would have challenged the finest shooters in the country. 11 shots, 11 necessary outcomes, 0 missed, 0 unintended. Torres said very quietly, "What do we say about that?" Hayes looked at the signature for a long moment. "You don't say anything," he said. "You just make sure you understand it." Torres nodded. In the dark on the ridge, Olivia heard Reynolds' final call, and she let herself breathe in a way that she had not allowed herself to breathe since she'd settled into position 3 hours and 22 minutes ago. Not a release exactly. A recognition. The recognition that the weight she had been carrying precisely since the vehicle dropped her at the mountain base had been set down in the correct place, and that the thing it was there to protect had survived. She began her extraction sequence, methodical, unhurried. Every movement reversing the process by which she had arrived, the discipline of departure as thorough as the discipline of preparation. She thought about the south building in exterior, the 2 guards, the calculation at 2,100 meters, from a difficult angle under time pressure. She thought about the corridor, the geometry of 2 targets in a narrow space and 12 seconds to work it. She thought about the west roof, the figure she had identified from an intelligence assessment that had found nothing, in a position no one had thought to look. She thought about 9 men in a valley 6 years ago. She packed her rifle with the care of someone who understands that every tool you treat well is a tool that performs when you need it most. She put her pack on. She began the descent. The mountain was dark and cold and entirely indifferent to what had just happened on its ridge. She moved through it the way she moved through everything. Without unnecessary sound, without unnecessary motion, with the complete economy of someone who has learned that survival is not drama and competence is not performance, and the most important things that happen in this world happen in exactly the kind of silence she was moving through right now. Below her, somewhere in the dark, vehicles were moving toward the extraction point. 3 people were going home who had not expected to go home. And every man on those vehicles was alive. That was the job. That had always been the job. She reached the base of the mountain at 0:30. The vehicle was waiting exactly where it was supposed to be. She got in. Nobody said anything. Not because there was nothing to say. Because some things exist in a space where words are simply not the right instrument. The vehicle moved through the dark toward Fort Redstone, and Olivia Carter sat with her rifle across her knees and her eyes open and her breathing even, and she did the things she always did after. She went through every face she had been responsible for, every single one. She held them in her mind with the specific care of someone who understands that the people below the ridge never see the ridge, and that what was done up there in the dark will never fully be known to the people it was done for, that this is exactly how it should be. This is the work. She held their faces, and she carried them home. The vehicle reached Fort Redstone at 01:47. Olivia was the first one out, not because she was in a hurry, because sitting still in a vehicle after 3 hours on a ridge was something her body rejected, and she had learned years ago to listen to her body about things like that. She pulled her pack. She held her rifle. She walked toward the debriefing building with the measured stride of someone whose mind was already moving through the next sequence, while her body was still completing the current. Behind her, the rest of the vehicles were arriving. She could hear doors opening, boots on concrete, voices, the particular quality of sound that a team makes when it has come back from something and is still processing the distance between where it was and where it is now. She did not look back. She had learned that too. You completed the debrief. You documented what needed to be documented. You made sure the institutional record contained the information it needed to contain. And then you slept. And when you woke up, you started building toward the next one. The debriefing room was already lit when she pushed open the door. Hayes was there. He was standing at the far end of the table with 2 cups of coffee, 1 in each hand, and when she walked in, he held one out without saying anything. She took it. She sat down. He sat across from her. For approximately 30 seconds, neither of them spoke. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who understand each other well enough to know that words are sometimes the least efficient form of communication. Hayes drank his coffee. Olivia drank hers. "What?" Hayes said finally. "Yes," she said. Westroof was not in any intelligence assessment. "No, how long had you been watching that position before you identified the movement?" Olivia thought about it. Not because she didn't know she knew exactly, but because she was being precise. 18 minutes. The figure moved once. Less than 2 seconds of movement. I almost missed it. Almost. Almost, she confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. If you had missed it, the mission would have been compromised, she said simply. The figure on the roof had line of sight to Reynolds' approach path. If they transmitted before I identified them, she stopped. She didn't finish the sentence because it didn't need finishing. Both of them understood what the unfinished sentence contained. Hayes set his coffee down. He looked at the table for a moment. When Reynolds brought you in as the precision specialist, he said carefully, he told me he'd requested you specifically. Not a type, not a capability level. Olivia looked at him. I didn't know that, she said. I know you didn't, Hayes said. I'm telling you now because I think you should understand the full picture of why you're here. He paused. Reynolds knew about Black Valley. Not from the official record. From one of the 9 men. A personal conversation 3 years ago. The man told Reynolds there was a shot taken from a position that shouldn't have been possible. That the shot saved everyone. And that the person who took it was never identified. Olivia was very still. Reynolds spent 2 years trying to find out who Silent Raven was, Hayes said. 2 years. Working through classified channels, through personal connections, through the specific network of people who talk about things that aren't on any record. He found you 8 months ago. He's been waiting for the right mission since then. The room was quiet. Olivia processed this. He designed this operation around your capability, Hayes said. The overwatch position, the distance requirements, the timeline. Everything was built on the assumption that there was one person who could do what needed to be done from that ridge. And he spent 2 years finding her. Olivia put her coffee down on the table. She looked at it. Something was moving through her that she did not immediately have a name for. It was not quite gratitude. It was not quite surprise. It was the specific and unfamiliar sensation of discovering that something you had done in complete isolation in the private space of duty and responsibility that had always been yours alone had been seen, had mattered in a way that traveled far beyond the immediate outcome. That 9 men walking out of a valley had changed the life of the commander who went looking for their guardian angel. He didn't tell me, she said. No, Hayes said. He thought it would complicate your preparation. He was right, she said. Hayes nodded once. He usually is. He picked up his coffee again. I thought you should know. After. Because you deserve to know that the person who built this mission around your capability did so with full understanding of what he was asking. He didn't send you up that ridge not knowing. He sent you up there knowing exactly and trusting exactly. Olivia sat with this. She thought about Reynolds in the briefing room, looking at her with the expression she had read as neutral professional assessment, and was now, retroactively, something more complex. The specific attention of someone who has been looking for something for 2 years and has finally found it and is working very hard not to let that show, because it would change the dynamic in ways that would not serve the mission. She thought about the mission file with its carefully constructed parameters, the distances that matched her specific capability, the timeline that gave her the hours she needed, the operational design that was, she now understood, not just tactically sound but personally calibrated. He built me a mission, she said. He built you a mission, Hayes confirmed. The door opened. Reynolds walked in. He was still in his operational gear, which meant he had come directly from the vehicles. His face carried the particular quality of a commander who has run an operation from the front and is now processing the distance between active engagement and the room they're sitting in. There was no visible relief, which was professional, but there was something around his eyes that had not been there before the mission. He looked at Olivia. She looked at him. Hayes stood up. I'll get the debrief forms, he said. He was not getting debrief forms. He was giving the room a different quality, which both Reynolds and Olivia understood. He walked to the far end of the room. Reynolds sat down across from Olivia, the same chair Hayes had been in. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then you identified the west roof. Yes, she said. That was not in any assessment. Not ours, not agency, not any of the prior surveillance runs. I know. Reynolds looked at the table. He looked at it the way Hayes had looked at it, like a man working through something real. I've been running operations for 23 years. I have worked with the best precision operators this country has produced. He stopped. Olivia waited. I have never, Reynolds said, seen anything like what happened tonight, from any of them. Olivia said nothing. That's not a compliment, Reynolds said, and something in his voice shifted. I mean that in the specific sense that I don't have an adequate framework for it. What you did tonight from that ridge, the identification, the wind calculation, The sequential shots under compressed timelines that falls outside any category I know how to apply. It's the job, Olivia said. It's your job, Reynolds said. It is not the job in the general sense. Don't minimize it because you're not comfortable accepting the dimension of it. She looked at him. He held her gaze with the steady directness of a man who has spent 23 years earning the right to say hard things clearly. Hayes told you, she said. It was not a question. About what I told him? Yes. You spent 2 years finding me, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. You could have told me before the mission. Would it have changed how you prepared? She thought about this honestly. No, she said. But it would have changed what I was carrying up that ridge. Reynolds nodded slowly. That's why I didn't tell you. I needed you to carry exactly what you always carry. Not the weight of being found. Not the weight of being the person someone spent 2 years looking for. Just the weight of the mission. He paused. Was I wrong? Olivia considered the question with the same seriousness she gave everything. No, she said finally. You were right. Reynolds looked at her. The West Roof figure. If you hadn't been watching that position, I know, she said. My approach element would have been compromised. I know. Which means, I know what it means. Commander, she said, and her voice was not harsh, but it was final. The voice of someone who has already done the arithmetic on this and does not need it narrated back to them. Reynolds looked at her. He almost smiled. It didn't quite arrive, but the territory was visible. Fair enough, he said. He stood up. He looked at her for a moment longer than professional debrief required. Get some sleep, he said. Debrief at 0900. Full team. He walked to the door. He stopped. Without turning around, he said, I'm glad I spent 2 years. He walked out. Olivia sat alone in the debriefing room. She picked up her coffee. It had gone cold while she wasn't drinking it. She drank it anyway. At 0230, the full team assembled in the mission debriefing room for the preliminary after-action review. It was not the formal debrief that was 9 hours away. This was the immediate review, the raw accounting of what had happened and in what sequence, conducted while the details were still immediate and the operational memory was still clear and unedited by sleep and time. And the brain's natural tendency to organize experience into narratives it finds more manageable than the truth. Olivia sat at the table. She had changed out of her operational gear and was in the same simple tactical jacket she'd arrived in 2 days ago. She had not slept. She was not visibly tired, which was the result of a specific physiological discipline that she had built over years of exactly this situation. Brooks walked in and sat down directly across from her. He looked at her. She looked at him. The corridor, he said. 2 targets, 12 seconds. 11, she said. Brooks blinked. I'm sorry, you said 12? It was 11. Brooks stared at her for a moment, and then something happened that Olivia had not seen from him in 2 days. He laughed. Not the performance of laughter from the checkpoint or the carefully controlled near laughter of the briefing room. A real laugh, short, surprised, and completely genuine. 11 seconds, he said. All right, Castillo came in next. He was still running the particular energy of someone who had been in sustained high-stress engagement and hadn't fully come down yet. He moved fast, he sat down fast, he looked around the table fast. His eyes landed on Olivia. He said, without preamble, the south building exterior. We were 10 seconds from losing our route. You cleared it with 6 seconds to spare. 8, Olivia said. Castillo looked at Brooks. Brooks said she's precise. Apparently, Castillo said. He looked back at Olivia. The 3 packages are being transported to medical evaluation. 2 are in reasonable condition. 1 is going to need time. He paused. But they're going home. Olivia nodded. She did not allow herself the full weight of that statement right now. She knew from experience that the weight of what the mission had meant not tactically but humanly, in the specific sense of 3 lives that were going to continue when they had good reason not to, was something that needed to be processed carefully and in private. Taking it in fully in a room full of people was not the right environment for what that weight required. She filed it. She would come back to it. Reynolds opened the preliminary review at 0240. He ran through the timeline. He called on each element lead. He listened with the complete attention of a man who understands that an after-action review is not a performance, it is the process by which an organization learns. And learning requires honesty that is sometimes uncomfortable. When he reached the Overwatch segment, he looked at Olivia. Talk me through the West Roof identification, he said. She did. Clean, sequential, technical. The 18 minutes of observation. The 2-second movement. The calculation about the position's inconsistency with standard security posture. The decision to assess it as a threat. Reynolds listened. At what point did you make the call to engage? When you confirmed, she said, I identified the threat and reported. The decision to engage was yours. Reynolds looked at her. The decision to take the shot was mine, he said carefully. The decision that kept us alive long enough for me to make that decision was yours. The identification, the assessment, the 17-second window between your call and my confirmation in which you already had the shot calculated and were waiting for authorization. That window existed because you were already there. The room was quiet. Olivia looked at Reynolds. That's the job, she said. Yes, Reynolds said. He looked around the table. And I want every person in this room to understand something. The margin on this mission was not our planning. It was not our execution. It was the overwatch. It was the eyes on that ridge reading a compound that we had assessed to the best of our institutional capability and still missed a critical threat in. He paused. We didn't miss it. She didn't miss it. And that difference is why 3 people are going home and every person in this room came back. Nobody spoke. Hayes, sitting in the corner with his tablet and his 5th coffee of the day, looked at Olivia and found her looking at the table with the expression of someone absorbing something that requires a specific quality of internal space to hold properly. He looked away. Some moments required privacy even in a room full of people. The preliminary review concluded at 03:25. As the room began to clear, Brooks stopped at the door. He turned. He looked at Olivia, who was still sitting at the table, not moving yet, in the small pause between one thing ending and the next thing beginning. Carter, he said. She looked up. I said some things at the gate, he said, when you arrived. And in the barracks that night, you apologized, she said. I know I apologize, he said. I'm not apologizing again. I'm saying something different. He paused. He was working through it in real time, which was unusual for Brooks, and which meant it was genuine. When I saw your file, the gaps in it, I used the gaps as a reason to doubt you. And the gaps were classified operations that you can't discuss and I can't read, and that were apparently exactly the kind of work that leaves gaps in files because it's too important to document. He stopped. I built a case out of an absence and I was wrong. That's not just an apology. That's a correction. A change in how I think about that kind of evidence. Olivia looked at him, the steady attention, reading. Most people don't do that, she said. Make the correction out loud. Most people aren't about to trust their lives to a person they almost couldn't see, Brooks said. It seemed worth being clear. He walked out. Hayes watched him go. He looked at Olivia. He's a good operator, he said. Yes, she said. He is. He's also hard to move, Hayes said. Changing his mind in front of the team, that cost him something. I know, Olivia said. That's why it mattered. Hayes nodded. At 0400, the base settled into the particular quiet of a facility that has come back from something and is now in the process of processing the distance between what was and what is. Not sleep exactly, not wakefulness. The in-between space where the body begins its accounting. Olivia was in that space. She sat on the floor of her room with her back up against the wall, in the position she had been in the night before, in the dark, doing the remembering. She went through the faces, Reynolds, Brooks, Castillo, Torres, every operator on the primary and secondary elements. She held each one with the care and attention that the people below the ridge deserve from the person who was above it. Then she went through the 3 faces she didn't know. The 3 people in the lower compound who had been there long enough that coming home was something they might have stopped believing in. She didn't know their names. She would probably never know their faces. But she held the space where their faces would have been, and she gave it the same weight she gave everything else. This was the accounting. This was what the job cost and what the job gave back. She sat with it for a long time, then she closed her eyes. And in the specific dark behind her eyelids where all of it lived, the ridge, the wind, the 11 shots, the west roof, the corridor, the south building, the 9 men in a valley 6 years ago, every operation that appeared on no record in any place she let herself be still. Not empty, still. There was a difference. Empty meant nothing was there. Still meant everything was there, and you had made peace with carrying it. She had learned this a long time ago. She was still learning it. She slept. At 0700, she woke to a sound outside her door. She was alert before she was fully conscious, which was a reflex that had been built too deep to remove, and which she had stopped trying to remove because it had saved her life on at least 2 occasions. She listens. Multiple subdued. The specific quality of people who are talking quietly, not because the conversation is private, but because it is early, and they have some consideration for the fact that the person in the room might still be asleep. She stood up. She opened the door. In the corridor outside, Brooks and Castillo were standing with two other operators from the primary element. They stopped talking when she opened the door. "We were going to the mess hall," Brooks said. He said it with the straightforward simplicity of someone who has decided the most honest approach is also the most direct one. "Figured you might want to come." Olivia looked at him. She looked at Castillo, who was making careful eye contact with the middle distance in a way that suggested this had been Brooks's idea, and Castillo had agreed to it with the specific solidarity of someone who understood that the gesture mattered. She looked at the two other operators, whose names she knew from the briefing documents as Santiago and Kim. Santiago was looking at his coffee cup. Kim was looking at her with the direct, uncomplicated attention of someone who has decided to be straightforward about being glad she was there. "Yes," she said. They walked to the mess hall together. It was not a dramatic moment. Nobody announced anything. Nobody performed anything. They simply walked through the corridor of Fort Redstone at 0700 with the tired, purposeful stride of people who have been awake for much longer than they should have been, and whose bodies were requesting something hot and caloric. But Hayes, coming from the operations room with his tablet and his empty coffee cup, saw them pass the corridor junction. He stopped. He watched. He watched Brooks walk beside Olivia without the posture of someone managing a situation or performing inclusion. The ease of it, the ordinariness, the way the group moved as a group, with the specific social geometry of people who have decided, without announcement, that the arrangement is correct. Hayes stood at the corridor junction for a moment after they passed. He thought about the checkpoint 2 days ago. The laughter. The small bag on the concrete. The woman who had looked at the men laughing at her with the patient attention of someone who already knew how the situation ended. He thought about the range. The 3 holes touching at 1,200 meters. The silence that replaced the laughter. He thought about the west roof. He thought about 11 shots in the dark from a mountain ridge at distances that the best shooters in the country would approach with careful, practiced humility. He thought about Brooks walking beside her through a corridor at 0700. He thought about the specific distance between those two things, the laugh at the gate and the walk to the mess hall, and what it had taken to cross that distance. Not from Olivia's side. She had never been moving toward anything. She had simply been herself consistently from the moment she stepped out of that car. The distance had been crossed by the people who laughed. That was what Hayes found worth thinking about. He walked to the mess hall himself. He got his coffee. He sat at the corner table as always. He watched the table where Brooks and Castillo and Santiago and Kim and Olivia were sitting. He watched them talk with the easy practicality of people debriefing in the informal way, the way that captures things that the formal process doesn't, the way that requires trust and comfort, and the specific willingness to be honest in a small group about what the night had cost. He watched Castillo say something that made Olivia's expression change, not a smile, exactly, but the territory where a smile lives. The shift in the face that means something landed correctly. He watched Brooks listen to something Olivia said with the complete, leaned forward attention of someone who's receiving information they intend to use. He watched this and thought about 23 years of Reynolds building teams and the specific difficulty of Reynolds had built in 48 hours that most commanders never managed in 48 months. Not trust exactly. Trust was the outcome. The thing Reynolds had built was understanding. The specific understanding that comes when people encounter genuine capability and have the honesty to update their assessment rather than protect their prior position. That was what had happened here. And it had happened because a woman had walked through a gate with a small bag and had not performed anything, had not defended herself, had not argued for her place, had not asked for recognition, had simply been what she was, completely and without modification, and had let the facts organize themselves around her in their own time. At 0850, the formal debrief assembled. The room was full. Every element, Torres, Hayes, Reynolds at the head. Medical staff had submitted a preliminary status on the 3 recovered hostages. Communications had submitted the mission recording. The intelligence team had submitted an updated threat assessment based on what the mission had revealed about the compound's actual security posture. Reynolds opened the debrief with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. Sequence, timeline, decision points, outcomes. When the debrief reached the Overwatch segment, he did not call on Olivia first. He called on Torres. Torres looked at his notes. Overwatch established position at 2151, ahead of schedule. First wind reading confirmed at 2204. thermal reversal occurred as predicted by Captain Carter's pre-mission analysis. Wind settled at 11 miles per hour northwest by 22:10, consistent with Captain Carter's prediction within 1 mile per hour variance. Reynolds nodded. Pre-mission analysis was accurate, to a degree that our meteorological equipment didn't match until 20 minutes after Overwatch had already confirmed it, Torres said. He looked up from his notes. She was ahead of our instruments. A small silence. Reynolds moved forward. He documented the west roof identification. He documented the corridor. He documented the south building. He documented the pursuit element. He documented each decision point, each call, each outcome. When he finished, he looked around the room. Total mission duration from Overwatch deployment to extraction 3 hours 12 minutes. Total shots fired from Overwatch position 11. Total threat engagements by Overwatch 7. Total misses 0. Total friendly casualties 0. Total packages recovered 3 of 3. He paused. These outcomes are not independent of each other, he said. The 0 friendly casualties and the 3 packages recovered are the direct result of an Overwatch execution that exceeded every performance standard we currently have in place. He looked at Olivia. Captain Carter, the formal record of this mission will reflect your contribution with full accuracy. I want you to know that clearly before we close this debrief. Olivia looked at him. Understood, she said. I also want you to know, Reynolds said, and his voice shifted slightly, still professional, but with the specific quality of something personal being said in a professional context, that the mission that required this capability existed because 3 people needed to come home, and we needed the best option available to make that happen. He paused. We had the best option available. I want that to be said plainly on record in this room. The room was quiet. Hayes looked at his tablet. He looked at the notes he had been taking. He realized he had stopped taking notes about 4 minutes ago and had simply been listening. He put the tablet down. He looked at Olivia. She was sitting with the same quality of stillness she had carried through every room at Fort Redstone since the moment she stepped out of that car. But it was slightly different now. Not in any way that was obvious. In the way that you can tell, when you know what to look for, that a person is sitting in a room where they belong, not performing belonging, not working toward it, simply in it, as if the room had reorganized itself around her, quietly and without announcement, the way rooms do when the right person is finally in them. Hayes picked up his tablet. He wrote 1 line in his notes. He looked at it. He thought it was probably the most accurate thing he'd written in 30 years of operational documentation. He did not write what it said here because some truths are more precisely held when they stay in the moment they arrived in. The debrief closed at 10:40. People filed out. The energy in the room was the specific quality of completion, not happiness, exactly, not relief, but the settled rightness of a thing that was supposed to happen having happened in the way it was supposed to happen. Reynolds stopped Olivia at the door. Your next assignment, he said. She looked at him. It's already been requested, he said, by 3 separate agencies. I've also had a personal request from General Morrison at SOCOM. He paused. You're going to have choices to make. Olivia looked at him for a moment. When soon, Reynolds said, but not today. Today you did the job. Today you rest. He held out his hand. She shook it. You saved my team, he said. Simple. Direct, the kind of sentence that contains everything it needs to contain and nothing extra. I did my job, she said. You did your job better than anyone I have ever seen, he said. Those 2 things can both be true. She held his gaze for a moment. Yes, she said, they can. She walked out of the debriefing room into the corridor. Behind her, the room was full of the sounds of people completing the administrative work of a mission that was finished. Forms, recordings, the particular bureaucratic rhythm of an organization digesting an experience. Ahead of her, the corridor ran the length of the building to the outer door, and then to the compound, and then to whatever came next. She walked toward it. She passed the corridor junction where Hayes had stood that morning, watching them walk to the mess hall. She passed the door to the room she'd slept in for 2 nights. She passed the equipment bay where she'd checked her rifle 11 hours ago. She walked out the outer door. The desert air hit her face with the morning temperature, which was still on the cold side of what the afternoon would become. She stood in the open for a moment, not pausing dramatically, just standing the way you stand when you've been inside for a long time, and the outside takes a moment to register. She looked at the mountains. They looked exactly the same as they had looked yesterday morning when she'd studied them from the briefing room display. Dark at the base, lighter toward the ridge itself sharp and still against the sky. She looked at the ridge where she'd been 6 hours ago. She thought about what had happened there in the dark. She thought about the west roof figure, the 2 seconds of movement, calculation, the shot. She thought about 11 rounds and what each of them had meant. She thought about Brooks walking beside her to the mess hall. She thought about Reynolds saying, "You did your job better than anyone I have ever seen." She thought about the 3 people who were in transport to medical care right now, going home, going toward the rest of their lives that had almost ended in a compound in a mountain region that nobody would ever name in a public document. She stood in the morning air and she let all of it be real. Just for a moment. Just long enough to understand the full weight of what it meant and to give it the respect it deserved before she filed it into the place where she kept everything that had happened, where it would live permanently, fully real, fully weighted, alongside the 9 men from Black Valley and every other mission that lived in her without appearing in any document anywhere. Then she breathed out. She turned away from the mountains. She walked back toward the compound, with sleep to get before the afternoon came with its choices and its requests from 3 separate agencies and its questions about what came next. But before any of that, before the choices and the next mission and the next ridge in the dark with the next weight to carry, she needed to take care of the rifle. She always took care of the rifle before she slept. That was the order of things. That had always been the order of things. She walked toward the equipment bay with the measured stride of a woman who understands exactly where she is going and why. And the desert morning held her in its early light, and the mountains behind her were exactly as they had been, and exactly as they would remain, carrying in their stone and their silence the fact of what happened on their ridge the night before, which no monument would ever record and no document would ever fully name, just as it should be, just exactly as it should be. She slept 4 hours, not because 4 hours was enough, because 4 hours was what the timeline allowed, and she had learned long ago that sleeping to the available window and waking clean was more useful than chasing a number that the day wouldn't give her. She was awake at 14:30, alert before the last moment of sleep had fully released her. She lay still for exactly 3 seconds, a habit, not indulgence, the 3 seconds she used to take inventory of where she was and what the current situation required, and then she was up. She took care of the rifle first. She had cleaned it before sleeping, as always, but she checked it again now with the particular attention of someone who understands that the difference between a tool that performs and a tool that fails is almost always found in the moment you chose not to check. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. She set it down. She dressed. She moved toward the door. She stopped. She stood in the middle of the room for a moment that lasted about 5 seconds and contained something she rarely allowed herself in the space between operations. Not reflection exactly, not sentiment. The specific brief acknowledgement of weight of what had been carried and what had been set down correctly and what would need to be picked up again. Then she opened the door and walked out. The corridor was different. She noticed it immediately, the way she noticed everything, not with alarm, but with the precise, automatic cataloging of changed information. The quality of the corridor was different. The sound of the bass was different. There was an energy running through Fort Redstone at 14:30 that had not been there at 0900, and it was not the energy of a facility going about its standard afternoon business. She walked toward the operations room. Hayes was in the corridor outside it, which was the first unusual thing. Hayes was never in corridors. Hayes was always at a table, at a station, in a position. The corridor was transition space, and Hayes was not a man who spent time in transition space. He was standing with a tablet in his hand and an expression that Olivia had not seen on his face before. It was not quite discomfort. It was the face of a man who knows something that he's uncertain how to communicate and is waiting for the right moment, which the other person's arrival has just created. "Hey," she said. "Carter," he said. A pause. "What's happening?" she said. Hayes looked at his tablet. He looked at her. He looked at his tablet again, which was 2 looks more at his tablet than Hayes normally needed to make a decision about anything. "There was a communication this morning," he said, "while you were sleeping. From SOCOM. Reynolds told me there were requests," she said. "This isn't a request," Hayes said. "General Morrison is here. In person. He arrived 40 minutes ago." Olivia was still General David Morrison, SOCOM commander. The man who ran special operations at the highest institutional level. The man whose office the mission requests had come from, whose name appeared on the classifications that made files look like Swiss cheese. The man who did not make personal appearances at operational facilities for standard mission debrief purposes. Why, she said. Not a question, a calculation running. That's what I've been trying to determine, Hayes said. He said it with the specific honesty of a man who genuinely doesn't know and is not going to pretend otherwise. Reynolds is with him now. He asked me to find you when you woke up. Olivia looked at the corridor, at the operations room door, at Hayes. Has anyone told you anything, she said? Morrison's aide told Torres that the general wanted to speak with the Overwatch operator from last night's mission. Personally, Hayes paused. That's all I have. Olivia processed this. In her experience, when generals made personal appearances to speak with specific operators, it meant one of three things: a new assignment of unusual sensitivity, a formal recognition that required the general's presence, or a problem. She had not made a mistake on that ridge. She was certain of this the way she was certain of everything she had calculated and executed, not with arrogance, but with the specific clarity of someone who has reviewed their own work with complete honesty and found it sound. So it was not a problem, which left the other two. Take me to Reynolds, she said. Hayes nodded once and walked. Reynolds was in the command briefing room, the large one with the full wall display that they'd used for the mission planning. He was standing at the far end of the table. General Morrison was standing beside him. Morrison was 63 years old. He was built like a man who had spent 4 decades in physical environments that did not permit softness, and who had maintained the discipline of those environments long after they were no longer strictly required, because the discipline had become indistinguishable from character. He had a face that had seen enough that it no longer produced surprise easily. He was looking at the mission display on the wall when Olivia and Hayes walked in. He turned. He looked at Olivia with the complete, direct attention of a man who has reviewed her file, has been briefed on last night's mission, and has made a specific decision about what he is doing in this room today. Captain Carter, he said. General Morrison, she said. He studied her for a moment, not rudely. With the frank assessment of someone who has learned that the first 30 seconds of meeting a person contains information that the next 30 minutes sometimes obscures. Sit down, he said. They sat. Reynolds at the head of the table. Morrison to his right, Hayes to Olivia's left. Olivia directly across from Morrison. Morrison did not open with pleasantries. This was, Olivia thought, a point in his favor. I've reviewed the full mission record from last night, he said. The communications log, the shot documentation. Captain Carter, I've also reviewed the meteorological data that your pre-mission assessment predicted, which our own instruments confirmed 20 minutes after you'd already accounted for it in your position planning. Olivia said nothing. I want to understand the west roof, Morrison said. Walk me through it. She walked him through it. The same way she'd walked Reynolds through it in the debrief. Clean, sequential, technical, no embellishment. Morrison listened with the complete attention that senior commanders either have or don't, and which cannot be performed convincingly because the absence of it is visible in ways that most people are too polite to identify. But he had it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. 18 minutes of observation, he said, 2 seconds of movement. An assessment that contradicted every piece of intelligence we had on that compound. Yes, she said. And you were right, he said. Yes, she said. Morrison leaned back in his chair. He looked at Reynolds. I've been doing this for 40 years, he said. I've seen extraordinary operators. I've seen people do things under pressure that I couldn't have predicted from any prior assessment. He looked back at Olivia. What I saw in that mission record this morning is in a different category. Olivia said nothing. She was not being modest. She was waiting for the sentence that the current one was building toward. I'm here, Morrison said, because there is a program. He paused. The pause had weight. A program that has been in development for 3 years, classified above the level of anything that passed through this room during mission planning. Its purpose is to create a specific capability that currently does not exist in any organized form in our operational structure. Hayes looked at Morrison. Olivia felt Hayes look at her. She kept her eyes on Morrison. The program requires one person, Morrison said. One specific capability set. We've been looking for the right person for 3 years. The room was very quiet. We found her 6 years ago, Morrison said, and spent 4 years not knowing her name. Olivia understood now. She understood it completely, and the understanding arrived not gradually but all at once, the way significant things arrive fully formed, carrying their full weight from the first moment. Black Valley, she said. The program was built around that shot, Morrison said, around the capability that shot represented. We didn't know who took it. We spent 2 years trying to find out. Reynolds found you first. He looked at Reynolds with something that in a less controlled face would have been humor. By about 4 months, Reynolds said nothing, but something in his posture communicated satisfaction. The program needs someone who can do what you do, Morrison said. Not just the precision work, the analysis, the identification, the thermal reversal calculation from satellite imagery, the west roof, the complete operational picture that you carry in your head and execute from a position that nobody else would have thought to occupy. He paused. We need that capability systematized. We need it teachable. We need someone who can build it into a program that produces operators at a level that currently doesn't exist in our inventory. Olivia looked at him. You want me to teach, she said. I want you to build, Morrison said. There's a difference. Teaching transfers what exists. Building creates what doesn't. I want you to take what you are and figure out how much of it can be made into something repeatable. He paused. And I want you to keep operating. This is not a desk assignment. The program runs concurrently with active operational deployment. You develop the curriculum. You teach it. You also continue doing what you do because the program needs living examples of its own highest standard. Hayes made a sound that was not quite a word. Olivia looked at him. His face was doing the thing it had done at the range 2 mornings ago when she'd put the 3rd round through the same hole at 1,200 meters. The thing it did when it encountered something that exceeded its existing framework. He was looking at Morrison with the expression of a man hearing an idea that he wishes he had thought of. The program has a location, Morrison said. A facility, staff, budget, everything it needs except the person to lead it. He looked at Olivia steadily. I'm offering you that position. I'm offering it in person because it is not the kind of offer that should be made through channels. It is the kind of offer that deserves a direct conversation and a direct response. Olivia looked at the mission display on the wall. The mountain range was still on the screen from the morning's debrief. She could see the ridge where she had been, the compound in the valley, the sight lines. She thought about what Morrison was describing. A program, a curriculum. The systematic attempt to take what she had built inside herself over years of exactly this kind of work and determine what was transferable and what was singular, and how much of the gap between ordinary precision and what she did could be closed by the right instruction from the right person. She thought about Hayes, about the 11 years he had spent trying to teach the thing that could not quite be taught from a manual, about the way he had looked at her at the range and said, "You belong here," more than almost anyone I've ever seen. She thought about what it would mean to build something that made that sentence possible for someone who hadn't had her specific path. She thought about the 9 men. She thought about the 3 people going home today. She thought about the west roof and the 2 seconds of movement and the 18 minutes of watching that had preceded it. She looked at Morrison. I have conditions, she said. Reynolds made a sound, a small sound. Hayes looked at his tablet. Morrison's expression did not change, but something around his eyes did. The specific shift that happens when a person's assessment of who they are talking to is confirmed. Tell me, Morrison said. I continue operational deployment on a schedule that I control, she said. The program does not become a reason to remove me from the field. I build the curriculum, but I also keep doing the work, because you cannot teach what you're not still doing. Agreed, Morrison said. The program admits candidates based on capability assessment that I designed, she said. Not rank, not tenure, capability. If a 22-year-old passes the assessment and a 15-year veteran doesn't, the 22-year-old is in the program. Morrison looked at Reynolds. Reynolds looked at Morrison. Something passed between them that was the compressed communication of 2 senior commanders who have just encountered a condition that is entirely reasonable and slightly inconvenient and are deciding in real time to accept it. Agreed, Morrison said. And the program has a name, she said. Not a classified designation, a name. Something that the people who go through it can carry. She paused. Something that tells them what it requires. Morrison looked at her. What name? Olivia was quiet for a moment. She thought about the ridge. She thought about 3 hours and 22 minutes of stillness in the dark. She thought about what you needed to be, in the most fundamental sense, to do the thing the program was designed to produce. The ridge, she said. You call it the ridge. The room was quiet. Then Morrison nodded. One single nod, slow and deliberate, the nod of a man who has just heard a right answer and is acknowledging it without performance. The ridge, he said. Done. Hayes looked at his tablet. He wrote something. He looked at what he wrote. He almost smiled. Olivia looked at Morrison. Then yes, she said. I'll build it. Morrison stood. He extended his hand across the table. She shook it. His grip was exactly what she expected, firm, direct, not demonstrating anything. Simply present. Reynolds will coordinate the transition, Morrison said. I'll need you at the program facility within 30 days for initial assessment of the existing staff and infrastructure. Understood, she said. Morrison looked at her for a moment before he turned to leave. The look of someone who has arrived at a destination they've been traveling toward for a long time and is taking a moment to mark the arrival before moving into whatever comes next. He walked out. Reynolds looked at Olivia. 3 years, he said. He's been trying to build this for 3 years. He came here in person because he was afraid you'd say no. Olivia looked at him. Was he right to be afraid? Reynolds considered this. An hour ago, I didn't know the answer to that. And now, she said. Now, I think he was right to come in person, Reynolds said. But not because you would have said no. Because it deserved a direct conversation. He paused. You knew that. That's why you took the conditions seriously instead of just saying yes. She looked at him. You built this mission around me, she said. Yes, he said. And now Morrison wants to build a program around what this mission proved, she said. Yes, he said. And you knew, she said, before he arrived. You knew this was where it was going. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone caught. The quiet of someone deciding how honest to be about something they've been carrying for a while. I knew there was a program, he said. I knew Morrison had been building toward it. When I found you 8 months ago, I reached out to him. He paused. This mission was partly about what it accomplished operationally. It was also about demonstrating on a documented, verified record exactly what you are capable of. He held her gaze steadily. I used this mission to show Morrison what I already knew. The room was very quiet. Olivia looked at him. She felt the shape of the thing Reynolds had done, the 2 years of searching, the 8 months of coordination, the mission designed to be both operationally necessary and personally definitive. The specific, careful construction of a situation in which she would be exactly herself, performing exactly what she was capable of in a context that would be fully documented and fully witnessed. She felt the weight of being known this completely by someone she had only met 48 hours ago. She felt something else too. Something that she did not immediately name, but that lived in the vicinity of the understanding that the work she had done alone, in the dark, in positions that appeared on no record, had mattered to someone in a way that changed what was possible. You should have told me, she said. Yes, Reynolds said. He did not add anything to this. He simply accepted it. She looked at him. 30 days, she said. I need 30 days before the facility. Morrison said 30 days, Reynolds said. Then I have 30 days, she said. She stood up. She walked toward the door. She stopped. She turned. Reynolds, she said. He looked at her. Thank you for looking. He held her gaze. Thank you, he said, for being findable. She walked out. At 1500 hours, something happened at Fort Redstone that had not been planned, had not been organized, had not been announced through any channel or communicated through any official or unofficial mechanism. It simply began. Ethan Walker was the first. He was coming off his checkpoint shift, moving through the main corridor toward the mess hall, when he saw Olivia walking from the command briefing room toward the outer door. He stopped. He stood there in the corridor for a moment that lasted about 4 seconds, which was the time it took him to process the distance between who he had thought she was 48 hours ago and who she had demonstrated herself to be in the hours since. He straightened. He didn't think about it. He didn't perform it. He simply straightened to attention. Olivia walked past him. She saw him. She did not acknowledge the gesture directly. But something in her stride changed an almost imperceptible acknowledgement, the physical equivalent of received and understood, and she walked on. Ethan stood in the corridor for another moment. Then he walked on too. Ryan Mitchell was in the vehicle bay. He saw her cross the compound from the bay entrance, and he stopped what he was doing. He stood straight. He said nothing. There was no one else nearby to witness it. He stood straight anyway. Santiago was in the equipment room. He heard her footsteps in the corridor and came to the door. He stood straight. Kim was on the far side of the compound and saw her from a distance. She stood straight. One by one, through the compound of Fort Redstone, operators and support staff and checkpoint guards straightened as Olivia Carter walked, not in a formation, not at a signal. One at a time, in the separate locations of a facility going about its afternoon business, each person making a private decision that expressed itself in the same physical language. Hayes saw it from the operations room window. He stood. He watched Olivia walk across the compound. He watched the people around her. He saw what was happening not as a coordinated event, not as something planned, but as the organic expression of a facility that had updated its understanding and was finding the only vocabulary it had available to communicate that update. His hand moved. He didn't decide to raise it. He raised it, and the decision came after, in the recognition that the hand was already moving and the movement was correct. He stood at the operations room window with his right hand raised. Olivia was crossing the open ground toward the equipment bay. She felt it, not the specific action. She couldn't see them all from where she was, but she felt the quality of the compound change, the way you feel a room when it shifts, the specific and unmistakable weight of collective attention directed not at a performance, but at a fact. She stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the compound. She looked up. Hayes was at the window. She saw his hand. Then Reynolds appeared at the outer door of the command building. He walked into the compound. He walked with the deliberate, measured stride of a man who knows where he is going and why. He stopped 10 feet from Olivia. He looked at her. She looked at him. And Commander Michael Reynolds, 23 years in special operations, commander of the finest operators the United States had produced, raised his right hand and held it there. Not because he was ordered to, not because protocol required it, because he understood in the complete and honest way that he understood things, that the person standing in front of him had earned something that rank alone could never confer, and that his hand was the only instrument he had to convey it. Olivia stood very still. She had not expected this. She had expected the debrief to offer the choice, the 30 days. She had built her understanding of this situation through every sequence of events since she had stepped out of that car 48 hours ago, and she had not built a path that included this, because she had never wanted this. That was the thing that made it land the way it did. She had never wanted recognition, had never performed for it, had never positioned herself for it, had walked through every room at Fort Redstone being exactly what she was and doing exactly what the situation required, and then walking to the next room and doing it again. And here was the recognition anyway. Not because she had sought it, because the people around her had arrived at it themselves, had covered the distance from assumption to understanding through their own encounter with the truth of what she was, had made the correction out loud in whatever language they had available. Brooks came out of the barracks building. He saw what was happening. He didn't pause. He walked to a position 6 feet from Reynolds and he raised his hand. Castillo came out behind him. He raised his hand. Santiago. Kim Torres. Ethan Walker came around the corner of the main building with Ryan Mitchell beside him. Both of them, without speaking to each other, raised their hands. The compound of Fort Redstone, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in the desert, had organized itself into something that would appear on no official record and would be communicated through no channel and would live only in the memory of the people who were in it. A formation without orders, a salute without ceremony, a truth that a facility full of professionals had arrived at collectively and was expressing in the only way that meant anything in this world, not with words, not with documents, but with the body, standing straight, hand raised, weight of the gesture, carrying everything the words would have gotten wrong. Olivia looked at the formation. She looked at Reynolds. She looked at Brooks, who had thrown her bag to the floor 48 hours ago and now stood with his hand raised and his face carrying the specific expression of a man who has made a long journey in a short time and arrived somewhere worth the distance. She looked at Ethan Walker, who had called her sweetheart at the gate and was now standing straight with his hand up and his face doing the honest, uncomfortable, real work of a person who has genuinely reconsidered something about himself. She looked at Hayes in the window. She stood in the middle of all of it for a moment. Then she raised her right hand, not in return, not in acknowledgement of what was being offered, in something more precise than either of those things. In the recognition that this specific moment, this formation, this collection, people who had traveled from where they started to where they were, was the correct outcome, that the distance had been covered correctly, that what needed to happen had happened. She held it. They held it. The desert held everything in its afternoon stillness. Then Reynolds lowered his hand. Everyone lowered their hands. Reynolds walked toward her. He stopped 3 feet away. He did not give a speech. Reynolds was not a man who gave speeches. He said one sentence. "Every person standing here is alive because of what you did on that ridge," he said. Olivia looked at him. "I was doing my job," she said. Reynolds held her gaze. "Yes," he said, "you were?" He paused. "And your job is why we get to do ours." He held out his hand. She shook it. The compound began to move again. The ordinary afternoon business of a facility going about its work. People walked to where they were going. Conversations resumed. The formation dissolved back into the regular life of Fort Redstone the way formations do when they have completed the thing they formed to accomplish. But something remained. Hayes felt it from the window. The specific quality of a place after a truth has been acknowledged in it. The air in the compound was the same air it had been 10 minutes ago. The people were the same people. The buildings and the equipment and the mountains in the distance were exactly as they had been. But the place was different, not permanently dramatic, not transformed in some cinematic sense. Different in the way a room is different. After an honest conversation, the furniture is the same, the light is the same. But the space between the walls now contains something it didn't contain before. He watched Olivia walk toward the equipment bay. He watched her walk with the same stride she had walked with since she stepped out of that car. The measured economy of someone who has been exactly herself in every room they have moved through and has never been anything else, and has no intention of being anything else going forward. He thought about the 30 days. He thought about the program, the ridge, the curriculum that would be built from the inside of a capability that nobody had ever fully systematized because nobody had possessed it clearly enough to see all of its components. He thought about the operators who would go through it, who would come out the other side having been given access to something that the field had produced organically in a career spent in positions that appeared on no record and that Morrison had spent 3 years trying to find a way to make transferable. He thought about what it would do, not immediately, not in ways that anyone would announce, but in the slow, structural way that the right knowledge, transmitted to the right people at the right time, changes what is possible for everyone those people will ever be responsible for. He thought about 9 men in a valley, thought about 3 people going home. He thought about what comes next. He walked away from the window. He sat down at his table. He picked up his tablet. He opened the notes from the past 48 hours. He had been keeping them with the professional discipline of a man who understands that what gets documented shapes what gets remembered. He had written observations, assessments, timelines, technical data. He had written one line that he had looked at and set aside. He found it now. He read it. He put the tablet down. He looked at the window. He thought that 30 years in this business had taught him to be skeptical of moments that felt significant because the field was full of significance that didn't last and drama that didn't matter and people who seemed extraordinary until the next pressure came. He thought that the past 48 hours had not been any of those things. He thought about a woman who had arrived with a small bag and one quiet voice and had proceeded to be exactly what she was in every room she entered, under every kind of pressure the facility had produced for her, without modification, without performance, without asking for anything except the opportunity to do the job she had come to do. He thought about the formation in the compound. He thought about what it meant that the formation had organized itself. He picked the tablet back up. He read the line he had written. It said, "The most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates because she is the only one who knows the full shape of what's coming." He looked at it. He had written it at the range 2 mornings ago, watching the 3rd round go through the same hole at 1,200 meters, while the crowd behind him was still recalibrating. It was still the most accurate thing he had written in 30 years. He put the tablet down. He picked up his coffee. It was cold as always, because Hayes never drank his coffee fast enough. He drank it anyway. Outside Fort Redstone ran its ordinary afternoon. Engines. Boots. The equipment and the drills and the endless preparation for the things that would happen in places nobody would ever name in a public document. In the equipment bay, Olivia ran her final check on the rifle. She did this the way she did everything completely, precisely, without rushing and without waste. Every component reviewed, every surface clean, every function confirmed. She set it down. She thought about 30 days. She thought about the facility, the staff, the candidates who would come through a curriculum built from the inside of a capability they had never been given direct access to. She thought about what could be taught and what could only be developed and how to design the space in which development could happen faster than it had happened for her. She thought about the ridge. She thought that it was the right name, not because of the geography, because of what the ridge required. The stillness, the patience, the willingness to be alone in the dark for hours with the full weight of other people's lives, and the understanding that your job is not to be seen but to see. Not to be known, but to know. Not to come home celebrated, but to make it possible for the people below you to come home at all. That was what the Ridge asked. That was what the program would need to build. She picked up her pack. She walked out of the equipment bay. She walked through the compound toward the main gate. She passed the checkpoint. Ethan Walker was there. He was back at his post, doing the work of his shift the way he always did. But when she reached the checkpoint, he looked up from the monitor. He met her eyes. And for a moment, just a moment, the professional composure of the checkpoint gave way to something simpler. "Captain Carter," he said. "Walker," she said. He opened the gate. She walked through. She stood on the other side of the gate of Fort Redstone in the late afternoon light, with her pack on her back and her orders in her pocket, and 30 days ahead of her before the next chapter of a career that had always been built in exactly this way, one position at a time, one calculation at a time, one choice in the dark that nobody would see, but that would matter to people who would never fully know why. She looked at the road ahead. She thought about Black Valley, about the 9 men, about the thermal reversal that nobody else had calculated, and the shot that nobody had claimed, and the 6 hours of waiting in winter conditions in a position that appeared on no operational plan. She thought about last night's ridge, the west roof, the 11 shots, the 3 people going home. She thought about the ridge, the program, the people who would come through it and go into their own valleys and find their own positions and keep their own people alive in the dark. She thought about the specific unbroken line that ran from who she had always been to everything that was coming. She had never wanted to be found, but being found had made possible something that mattered more than her preference, and that she understood was the job in its largest sense, not just the shot, not just the ridge. The understanding that what you are, fully and without modification, is sometimes the exact thing the world needs you to be, and that your responsibility is not to manage that or contain it or wait until someone decides you deserve a room to be it in. Your responsibility is to walk through the gate and be it anyway. She walked forward. The road stretched ahead in the late afternoon light. Behind her, Fort Redstone held everything that had happened within its walls and would hold it for as long as walls hold anything not in documents, not in official records, but in the specific and permanent way that places hold truths that were real enough to change them. And Captain Olivia Carter, call sign Silent Raven, the woman nobody saw coming and nobody forgot after, walked forward into the 30 days that would become the program, that would become the legacy, that would outlast every classified file and redacted record and unanswered question in every debrief that had ever tried, and failed to capture the full shape of what she was. She did not look back. She never looked back. Was not the job. The job was always forward, and she had never once, in all the years and all the ridges and all the dark valleys, where she'd been the only thing standing between the people below and the outcome they couldn't see coming, stopped doing the job. She was not going to stop now. She walked forward. That was who she was. That was who she had always been. And that was exactly enough.